In 2013, Eric Loomis was pulled over by the police for driving a car that had been used in a shooting. A shooting, mind you, that he wasn't involved in at all. After getting arrested and taken to court, he pleaded guilty to attempting to flee an officer and no contest to operating a vehicle without the owner's permission. His crimes didn't mandate prison time, yet he was given an 11-year sentence, with 6 of those years to be served behind bars and the remaining 5 under extended supervision. Not because of the decision of a judge or jury of his peers, but because an algorithm said so. The judge in charge of Mr. Loomis's case determined that he had a high risk of recidivism through the use of the Correctional Officer Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions Risk Assessment Algorithm, or COMPAS. Without questioning the decision of the algorithm, Loomis was denied probation and incarcerated for a crime that usually wouldn't carry any time at all. What has society become if we can leave the fate of a person's life in the hands of an algorithm? When we take the recommendation of a machine as truth even when it seems so unreasonable and inhumane. Even more disturbing is the fact that the general public doesn't know how COMPAS works. The engineers behind it have refused to disclose how it makes recommendations and are not obliged to by any existing law. Yet we're all supposed to blindly trust and adhere to everything it says. Reading about this story, a few important questions come to mind. How much do algorithms control our lives, and ultimately, can we trust them? It's been roughly 10 years since Eric Loomis's sentencing, and algorithms now have a far greater penetration into our daily life. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, you're constantly interacting with tens, maybe even hundreds of algorithms. Let's say you wake up, tap open your screen and do a quick search for a place near you to eat breakfast. In this one act, you're triggering Google's complex algorithm that matches your keywords to websites and blog posts to show you answers that are most relevant to you. When you click on a website, an algorithm is used to serve you ads on the side of the page. Those ads might be products you've searched for before, stores near your location, or, eerily enough, something you've only spoken to someone about. You then try to message a friend to join you for your meal. When you open any social media app today, your feed no longer simply displays the most recent posts by people you follow. Instead, what you see can be best described by TikTok's For You page. Complex mathematical equations behind the scenes decide what posts are most relevant to you based on your view history on the platform. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and most notoriously TikTok all use these recommendation systems to get you to interact with the content that their machine thinks is right for you. And it's not just social media. Netflix emails you recommendations of movies to watch based on what you've already seen. Amazon suggests products based on what you've previously bought, and probably the most sinister of all, Tinder recommends you the person you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with. Or at least, that night. These might seem like trivial matters, but it's more than that. Algorithms are also used to determine who needs more healthcare, and when you have your day in court and a computer program decides whether you'd spend the next decade of your life behind bars for a crime that usually doesn't carry any time.
To truly understand why society feels broken, we need to start with the foundations of reality itself, the laws of physics, math, science, and logic that govern our world. Without this understanding, we're left grasping at symptoms without addressing the root causes. I know these concepts can feel overwhelming, which is why I'm excited to share Brilliant, the sponsor of today's episode. Brilliant is an interactive learning platform that makes mastering complex ideas approachable and even fun. With thousands of hands-on lessons in topics like math, data analysis, programming, and AI, Brilliant empowers you to learn by doing. Whether you're tackling the building blocks of logic or exploring cutting-edge topics like AI, it's all designed to engage you directly with problem solving. One of the reasons I've loved using Brilliant for years is how easy it is to fit learning into my life. Their mobile app and bite-sized lessons let you level up in just a few minutes. Whether you're on a lunch break, waiting in line, or trying to make better use of time you'd otherwise spend doom scrolling. For me, swapping TikTok sessions for Brilliant practice has been a game changer, but it's not just convenient, it's incredibly effective. Brilliant's first principles approach starts at the core and builds up, ensuring you not only learn concepts but truly understand them. Each lesson involves hands-on problem solving, a proven method that's up to 6 times more effective than passive learning like watching lecture videos. Plus, all the content is crafted by experts from leading institutions like MIT, Caltech, Duke, and companies like Microsoft and Google. One course that recently blew my mind was How LLMs Work, which dives into the mechanics behind large language models like ChatGPT. It broke down this incredibly complex subject into simple, interactive steps that made it not just understandable but fascinating. If you want to try this course or any of Brilliant's thousands of lessons for free for 30 days, visit brilliant.org/aperture or scan the QR code on screen. And if you decide to stick with it, you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Back to our story.
I'm not saying that all algorithms are bad and we should get rid of them. An algorithm is probably the reason you're watching this video in the first place. I'm saying we as a society need to make some changes to the way we currently interact and use these systems. One of the scariest things about algorithms is that they're built and altered in a black box with little oversight. The engineers behind them determine what we see and don't see. They classify, sort, order, and rank, and we don't get to know how or why. Even the government doesn't get to know how and why, and if they did, would they understand it? The engineers themselves often don't know why an algorithm behaves the way it does. They use AI and machine learning, which can make the outcomes become hard to predict. They become a mystery to makers as well. When companies like Google or Facebook are challenged about their platforms after something terrible happens, they hide behind the mythos of the algorithm. They're cold, unbiased systems, they suggest. They're rational. To err is human, not machine, they claim. This is the notion of algorithms that is potentially dangerous. We think of them as pillars of objectivity, incapable of the kind of biases that corrupt human society. But are they genuinely unbiased? Are they pure instruments of rationality? As much as big tech companies would like you to believe they are, the sad truth is they are not. When the engineers choose to classify and sort, they're using pre-existing classifications which are filled with bias already, and their methods of sorting enforce biases that can have real negative consequences. In 2019, an algorithm was used on more than 200 million patients in US hospitals to determine who would need more care. Although race wasn't included in the criteria, Black patients were discriminated against by the machine anyway. They were determined to require less care than white patients. How did this happen if race wasn't even an input, you might ask? Well, while race directly wasn't in the equation, previous healthcare expenses were a determining factor in deciding whether someone would need more care. And because Black patients have historically spent less on healthcare, the results were that they required less care, an incorrect blanket conclusion for situations that should be case-by-case evaluations. Although the racial bias was unintended, it still occurred as a result of the engineer's designs. It's because of issues like these that we can't hide behind the myth of the infallible machine. Biases like these will exist in machines as long as humans are the ones building them, and there is one bias that exists in almost every algorithm we use today, with far more reaching consequences. Meta, Twitter, Google, Amazon, Netflix, Tinder. Most tech companies and the platforms they offer you and me as services design their algorithms to maximize one thing and one thing alone: profit. These platforms generate revenue by primarily selling ads, and to generate more ad revenue, they try to keep you on their platforms longer because the longer you're there, the more ads you'll see and the more money they make. Take YouTube, for example. There's 3 main things that make any video successful on the platform: click-through rate, watch time, and session time. So all YouTube cares about is, can you get people to start watching your video, and can you keep them watching for as long as possible, so we can serve them more ads. For the most part, this works as it's supposed to, and people get served content they enjoy, but would have never found on their own. As with everything in life though, there are downsides. People have learned to game the system by using clickbait to lure viewers in, and then to push conspiracy theories that keep people glued to their screens whether the information is factual or not. YouTube's algorithm has also been accused of having a radicalizing effect on its viewers. Moderate content always leads to recommendations of more extreme content, which leads people down the notorious rabbit hole. You can start by watching videos about jogging, and YouTube would continue to recommend you videos that push you further slightly until one day you wake up and you're watching videos about running an ultramarathon. Facebook's algorithm shows you more content from friends whose posts you've liked or read in the past. This process slowly funnels you into a bubble where you're mostly reading the same opinions you already have, reinforcing them in your mind. The goal of this approach is, of course, to keep you on the platform longer with views you agree with. The consequence, though, is that many harmful beliefs are cemented into the heads of users on the platform instead of being challenged. The more you think about the algorithms of social media, the more they start to seem like programs for creating social problems for the sake of profit. So if that's the case, are all algorithms just evil piles of code that are determined to doom us all? Maybe, but maybe not. They do have extraordinary benefits to offer when used correctly. A dataset of 678 nuns from the Nun Study, a research project started in 1986 on the development of dementia and Alzheimer's, showed something very peculiar. Researchers tried to find if they could spot any patterns in the data to suggest a relationship between something in a person's early life and the onset of these diseases later in life, but to no avail. The team also had success to the letters that the nuns wrote decades prior, when they were entering into the sisterhood, around ages 19 and 20. An algorithm was able to detect in incredible accuracy through these letters which nuns would go on to have dementia in their elderly years. This is what algorithms are great at, comparing datasets and figuring out tiny patterns that humans are more likely to miss. They're sensitive to variations in data and finding patterns that lead to reliable predictions of possible outcomes. Today, algorithms are used in detecting the likelihood of getting breast cancer and presenting better models for tackling climate change. Except the machine isn't great on its own. Every potential positive here only works with a human behind it. Algorithms can act as the first layer for screening breast cancers, but a human has to act as that necessary second layer to verify the results. Using an algorithm for determining an appropriate jail sentence might one day make sense, only if there's a human deciding whether or not the generated output is sensible or not. One of the main problems with Eric Loomis's case is that the judge didn't question the algorithm's recommendation. He simply accepted the supposed objectivity of the machine and sent a man to prison for a crime that didn't warrant it. As it stands now, we just seem to be part of this enormous social experiment being run by tech gurus. And every year or so, another social experiment is added to the mix with its own unique set of social consequences. More recently, we're discovering what a rapid stream of bite-sized videos does to teenagers, or what a completely user-generated game does to tweens. So far, this video has been pretty hard on the big tech companies, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge that they are trying to address some of these issues with algorithms. YouTube, for example, has changed its algorithm to include quality and authority as measures of determining whether a video is recommended or not. Facebook has limited its targeting options to try and avoid another Cambridge Analytica scandal, where user data was distributed without consent for political purposes. Are these adjustments to the algorithm helping? Yes, but not as much as necessary. Even more is the fact that these efforts point to two things. One is that human intervention in algorithms is not only necessary, but needs a much stronger presence. Two is that tinkering with the algorithm is probably not going to resolve the consequences of their most significant bias, profit seeking. Keeping people on a platform is always going to be easier with content that sparks the most outrage. That's not always the case, of course. There is great content on YouTube and earnest viewers, like you watching this video right now. But for every creator seeking to share legitimate information, there seems to be several others blatantly exploiting the algorithm for a quick buck. How can we take these platforms back from them? The sad truth is, we can't. The algorithms need to change. They need to put human welfare above profits. We need to stop designing machines that take advantage of our psychological weaknesses. To make that world possible, we need to be more critical of the algorithm. We need to dismantle the notion that the algorithm is all-knowing, objective, and rational. The black boxes need to open up, and our blind trust in these systems needs to be challenged at every turn. To paraphrase the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, Tristan Harris, we're all looking out for the moment when technology would overpower human strength and intelligence. But there's a much earlier moment when technology overwhelms human weaknesses. That point is being crossed right now, and it's reducing our attention spans, ruining our relationships, destroying our communities. It's downgrading humans.
I am sorry. Those were the words uttered by Asa Raskin, the creator of the Infinite Scroll, after realizing his invention destroyed billions of people around the world. This one simple feature turned us into addicts. Is it too late for us to stop doom scrolling? If you've ever felt this searing pain going up your arm at the end of a long day, it's most likely caused by an inflamed tendon that runs along the inside of your hand and forearm. And of the most likely causes of this inflation is infinite scrolling. Like any other muscle, tissue, or joint in our body, the muscles in our hands and arms can get aggravated with overuse. The repetitive, constant motion of scrolling might not be some grand act of athleticism. Still, considering how much time we spend swiping our thumb or finger up and down, it's no surprise that many have developed this pain from overuse. And it's not just our bodies feeling the effects of infinite scrolling, we're increasingly isolated, anxious, and addicted, as we're bombarded with endless content that, for the most part, isn't improving our lives. Almost none of us can say we haven't felt negatively affected by a post or a video we've seen on social media. It's impossible to avoid. So how did we get here, and how did the infinite scroll become so ubiquitous in modern life? How does it keep us so engaged, and do we have any hope of escaping it? Humans weren't made to sit and stare at screens all day. Our ancestors were always on the move, running, jumping, and hunting. That's why I love the Olympics. It's a celebration of our natural athletic spirit. In ancient Egypt, scrolls were physical papers that were dramatically unfurled, revealing paintings and writings meant to enrich society. These scrolls, which were used for centuries, were finite, singular items that expressed specific ideas. That finality is exactly what the concept of infinite scrolling has eliminated. Despite the lingering pain you might feel in your forearm, scrolling has also taken the physical act out of being on the internet. In the days of the desktop computer, we needed our whole body to scroll. We had to sit in a chair and use all our fingers to type and move one hand to the mouse. The early days of being online had athletic terms like surfing. They hinted at some sort of deep, active exploration of the internet. And then the screens shrank. The devices shrank. We could have the experience of being online without moving anything but a single finger. With the invention of infinite scrolling, the adventurous nature of being online started disappearing. It became a passive activity rather than an active exploration. Now it's less like surfing and more like exposure therapy. We're stuck in place with our eyes locked on the screen, and we can't pull ourselves away to experience the actual world around us. The inventor of the infinite scroll, web designer Asa Raskin, has now made a second career out of his regret for inventing it back in 2006. While the passive activity might feel good in the moment, it's hard to argue that it is good. Of course, there are important, educational, and amazing things to learn on the internet and social media. There's communities to be found and skills to be taught, but the endlessness of it all has made us slaves to the algorithm instead of curious, intentional users. Scrolling has become a key element of our digital lives, so much so that we sometimes don't even realize we're doing it. How many times have you picked up your phone and, seemingly without realizing it, ended up 20 scrolls deep on TikTok? Scrolling is so second nature that it's not even an intentional act. Instead, it's how we spend our passive time. The mega corporations behind all the popular social media platforms wouldn't want it any other way. Our instinctive behavior to scroll reinforces their algorithms and has created an entire economy built on our attention spans. If we stay hooked on our phones longer, we present more opportunities to advertisers to sell us things, and therefore more opportunities for large tech companies to make money. The infinite scroll makes this cycle all but certain. Human brains have adapted to consume what's in front of us. It's not just puppy videos and vacation pics that keep us returning for more. In a 2005 study, researchers presented participants with bowls of soup connected to a tube that would automatically refill the bowl. The participants ate 70% more soup than others with normal bowls without even noticing. You can think of infinite scrolling like that tube at the bottom of the bowl, constantly there to refill our brain with a soup seasoned with content without us even realizing it. Tech companies have hijacked our brains and gotten us hooked on their products by tapping into our reward system. The brain's reward system produces dopamine, a neurotransmitter known as the feel-good hormone. When we're hit with a shot of dopamine, we feel excited, elated, and motivated. We need dopamine to be productive, to feel creative, and to get out of bed. But social media triggers a massive and quick release of dopamine that makes us feel like we're on a high. Normal dopamine levels help us get through our day and are often released at a slow, steady pace. These big spikes in dopamine that we experience when someone likes a photo we've posted or discovers a video that excites us can be deceiving. They trick us into thinking we will only feel good if we keep getting those big spikes. And that is called addiction. You might have felt something like this if you've ever parted ways with your phone for a day or even an hour. When we're disconnected from that addicting infinite scroll, our brain releases the stress hormone, cortisol, because it's not getting the intense hits of dopamine that it's used to. Our neural pathways are used to feeling activated, and suddenly they're stripped of that feeling. For some of us, this can happen with merely a few minutes away from social media. But if you can last a day, you might start to feel your heart rate increase, your blood pressure jump, or anxiety set in. The lack of reward you've been promised by endless scrolling on social media is hitting you, and you feel deprived as the stimulus has been removed. This reaction, or rather craving, is exactly how social media companies keep us using their platforms, even in the face of our own unhappiness. Social media takes human connection and turns it into a drug.
When we interact with social media, our brains light up in the same way as when we take drugs or drink alcohol. However, this drug on our phones that we can endlessly scroll through is available 24/7. The algorithm learns what we like and pushes us towards content we didn't even know we wanted. Our brain on the drug of social media isn't a brain that's sustainable. One way to know if the infinite scroll has trapped you in its fangs is by tracking the 3 C's. The first is control. Are you able to control your consumption and retain a sense of autonomy over your decisions when it comes to phone and social media use? The next is compulsion. Do you feel yourself regularly reaching for your phone, aimlessly scrolling just to feel like your mood is regulated? Have you become dependent on it to feel normal? And the third C is consequences. Are you suffering consequences in your actual life because of your social media use? Have you isolated yourself from friends and family or noticed emerging struggles with your mental health? If any of the C's apply to you, then it might be time to reassess your relationship with the infinite scroll. Even Asa Raskin says his goal was to create a seamless user experience, but he didn't foresee the consequences. He admits that the goal of the infinite scroll wasn't to help the user, but to keep the user online for as long as possible. He also acknowledges its contribution to rising rates of social media and smartphone addiction. I regret that I didn't think more about how this thing would be used, he told London-based The Times in 2019. Like many of us, Raskin senses the dangers of the infinite scroll, and there's a lot of them. Endless content on social media reinforces negative thoughts and feelings. If we feel depressed or anxious, we have a tendency to seek out news or information that will confirm those feelings, leaving us in a harmful cycle of negative reinforcement. It can also worsen any existing mental health struggles we're having, whether it's other people's cute photos with their partner that make us jealous, or someone expressing their own sadness that reminds us of our own, or a clickbait post filled with anger. We're susceptible to falling deeper down the hole we're already trying to climb out of. These symptoms might include panic or worry, especially when it comes to the way we consume news on social media. Scrolling through catastrophe after catastrophe and hot take after hot take leads to a dark rumination of how upsetting the world is. Yes, sometimes positivity makes it to your feed, but we all know that negative and extreme content is what gets clicks. Once this sets in, you might notice that you struggle with sleeping. So many of us scroll right before bed, even though we know it's not good for us. We sit slack-jawed, our faces illuminated by the screen a few inches away from our eyes, sinking deeper and deeper into the depths of content, and without us even knowing, this can increase our anxiety at the very exact time we're supposed to be relaxing. Poor sleep can in turn increase stress and other mental health issues, so even if the content itself isn't upsetting you, the mere fact of looking at it before you go to bed can have adverse effects. Not to mention that an endless supply of information presents us with so many conflicting ideas, moods, and advice that we're left uneasy when we do manage to put down our devices. There are very many opinions in the world, and to try and understand them in bite-sized servings on social media is a recipe for confusion and anxiety. Even as some sites have taken measures to reduce false news posts, it isn't always about whether the information is true or not, it's that there's so much of it. We're forced to wade through a sea of opinions, ideas, facts, lies, and perspectives, and it's impossible to sort out what we actually believe. If you take a step back from the infinite scroll of information and think about your own values outside of what everyone on the internet is saying, you probably could come up with a pretty good line of reasoning. But the moment you throw other people's posts into the mix, your independent mind is shut off. The irony is that we know it's bad for us. We scroll through articles about how we can't stop scrolling. You're watching a video on one now. We don't sit down and think, I'm gonna spend 30 minutes on Instagram right now. We sit down to watch one video or search for one thing, and then you just don't really stop. The Harvard Business Review conducted a study in 2022 with 6,445 US students and working adults and identified 3 factors influencing whether people choose to keep looking at content rather than switch to another activity. The first was the amount of media already viewed. Would the rabbit hole grow stronger once people already viewed a lot of content? In theory, one might think that if you watch a bunch of videos, you'll become bored, but the opposite is true. In the study, those who watched 5 videos instead of 1 were 10% more likely to watch more. Another factor that keeps us hooked is the similarity of the media we view. When presented with the option of watching more videos on the same topic as the ones they'd already watched, participants were 21% more likely to stick with these related videos than the participants who were told they could watch videos on another topic. Lastly, a deciding factor in addition to the content consumption is how we view that content. Unsurprisingly, uninterrupted video consumption made users 22% more likely to watch another video than those who had alternated between work tasks and videos. The infinite scroll holds the key to all three of these factors. They all increase with media accessibility and repetition. When something feels accessible, it becomes easier to process, and we anticipate that we'll enjoy it more. That's dopamine at work. Even if going down that content rabbit hole is at odds with what we actually want to be doing, we just can't help ourselves. The apps we use are in the driver's seat. They're designed to trap users in an infinite supply of content, making it easy to consume several posts and videos in a row, suggesting similar content and automatically start playing the next video without interruption. They fit all of the criteria to keep us addicted and away from our real lives. There's a lot of discussion in recent years about flow state. A flow state happens when we're immersed in an action that's both rewarding and challenging at the same time. All the while, we feel a sense of flow that keeps us engaged. Usually the flow is a good thing. It might help us stay fit or creative, or it can be the key to staying on task with work. However, regarding social media, the flow state is not where we want to live. A 2023 Baylor University study looked at 200 Instagram and TikTok users over the age of 18 and measured their time spent on the apps. They were asked about 5 aspects of their experience, specifically focused attention, enjoyment, curiosity, telepresence, and time distortion. All of these elements we want to achieve if we're finding a flow state, but the study found that they also exist when we use social media. If we are so immersed in content that we can't step out of it and redirect our attention, then we're in trouble. The invention and proliferation of the infinite scroll have not only made us addicted to our devices, but they've also swelled into real danger in the world around us. You can look at the global political landscape. When social media became a major part of political organizing, fundraising, and commentary, we were siloed into echo chambers that reaffirmed our pre-existing views. We also began the aptly named doom scrolling obsessively, looking for the most enraging, distressing posts that would work us into a frenzy, and the trend hasn't slowed down. Endless scrolling makes it impossible to step away from the bad news, and this tendency to continue looking at something that upsets us can have physical and mental effects. At no point in modern history was doom scrolling more pervasive than during the height of COVID. We were confronted with bad news every single day, which dug us deeper into our own echo chambers and turned us against one another from the isolation of our own homes. While COVID was undoubtedly a dangerous and dark time for the planet, the feelings of dread and living on high alert have lingered. Constant doom scrolling can develop into obsessively checking the news or looking for a post that might trigger our anxieties because we think it will alleviate our emotional distress, but the exact opposite is true. A constant flow of news and information interferes with other aspects of our lives. A 2022 Texas Tech study assessed people with problematic online consumption levels and found that 74% reported mental health problems and 61% experienced physical problems. The positive side of social media is that it can open our eyes to people and ideas that we wouldn't otherwise know existed. And it shouldn't be discounted. Our habit of consumption, which has grown over the last decade, but really swelled in the last 5 years, has not been the eye-opening experience that one might hope for. Instead, it has turned us into obsessive consumers who are slaves to an algorithm that very rarely fulfills the promise of introducing us to concepts that don't solidify our previously held beliefs. We have become detached from actual life, ignorant of our physical neighbors in favor of the people we see 45 minutes deep into a TikTok rabbit hole. We aren't just addicted to scrolling through social media, we're addicted to the ideas and people we find there, and the safety of what we think they provide. While seeking out like-minded individuals on the internet might seem like it would only bolster our self-confidence, we know that's not the case. Self-esteem has plummeted as we find ourselves chasing likes, views, and comments to make us feel good and worthy. Everyone knows that every Instagram post isn't the reality of someone's life, but it is pretty hard to keep that in mind when you are endlessly scrolling through bodies you wish you had or vacations you wish you were on. Logic just disappears when our impulsive reaction to the content we see takes over. Infinite scrolling rewards us for that reaction. The technology, together with our brain's reward system, sees us engaging with posts and features that ultimately don't make us feel very good, and pushes more of it on us. People aren't always out there trying to make you feel bad, but it is one of the side effects of the mere concept of social media. Everybody's putting their best foot forward, or at least only sharing a snippet of their own reality, and as we keep scrolling, we can't help but think, I wish I had that. Yet again, our attention is the only thing the platform cares about, not our emotional well-being. Nowhere is the struggle with self-esteem and emotional distress more poignant than when it comes to social media's effect on young people.
In 2023, the US Surgeon General put out an advisory about the effects of social media on youth mental health. He stated that although there's benefits of social media for younger users, there's not enough evidence that, overall, these platforms are safe for children. In fact, there's growing evidence that social media use is a major contributor to the youth mental health crisis in America. The American Psychological Association also issued a health advisory in 2023 on the dangers of social media for adolescents. By 2024, it lamented that no meaningful changes to social media platforms had been adopted and no federal policies had been enacted. These platforms, it argues, aren't inherently built for youth consumption. Young people require special protection due to their unique developmental vulnerabilities through childhood and continuing into their teenage and late adolescent years. These vulnerabilities are compounded if a young person is already experiencing psychological or physical challenges. Our brain's development from about the age of 10 until our mid-20s is linked with hypersensitivity to social feedback. We become especially invested in behaviors that will get us personalized feedback, praise, or attention from our peers. We all remember that inexplicable feeling in our formative years of just wanting to fit in, of being so aware of our social surroundings to the point that we're obsessed over it. But it's not just the playground or the cafeteria that presents these types of social pressures anymore. Social media's algorithms can present content that can be overly influential to young people and very hard to resist at an early age. It's as if the school bully is waiting around every corner to remind you of your perceived flaws and is constantly screaming in your ear. Since social media platforms prioritize engagement, young people are destined to see more and more content that drags them down instead of lifts them up. The struggles with self-esteem and social media addiction that adults feel are present in young people in a much stronger, more insidious way. Likes and follower counts activate regions of the brain that trigger repetitive behavior. This trigger has a greater influence on a younger person's attitudes than an adult's because they are more sensitive to both positive feedback and rejection. Young people have underdeveloped impulse control, so their ability to understand this trigger and reason their way out of this repetitive behavior is limited. When we're young, our cortical system, which is in charge of functions like reasoning, problem solving, and emotional regulation, is still developing. We are less capable of stopping behavior that leads to a temporary benefit, despite negative long-term consequences. Think about the school-aged individuals in your life. It's pretty obvious they make their decisions on a short-term basis, and it's not a bad thing, it's just called being a kid. But infinite scrolling is risky for youth because their ability to monitor and stop engagement on social media is more limited. That difficulty disengaging leads to higher rates of symptoms of dependency. Young people need boundaries, and the very definition of the infinite scroll is that there are none. Without boundaries and with endless digital clutter barraging them almost every minute of the day, the minds we depend on to keep the world around us on track in the future are being robbed of the skills needed to do just that. There have been lawsuits filed across the United States against companies like Google, the owner of YouTube, Snap Incorporated, which owns Snapchat, and Meta, which calls the shots for Facebook, arguing that social media isn't safe for the youth and attempting to hold these companies accountable. But with non-stop access around, no matter where you are, it's very hard for any of these lawsuits to do anything at all. And we can assume that the companies behind the platforms don't really want to do anything about it either. The Googles and the Metas of the world that benefit from the addictive nature of infinite scrolling are designed for profit. They are businesses. They are there to capitalize on our attention, and the attention of young people has proven very valuable. In 2023, social media companies made over $11 billion in ad revenue just from marketing to minors. A 2023 study from Harvard School of Public Health cited the need for government regulation of social media companies since they stand to make so much money from children and are clearly unable to self-regulate. The study argues that regulations and additional transparency could alleviate some of the harm to youth mental health. Of course, these companies aren't the first to advertise to children, but online ads are especially insidious for kids because they have a harder time telling the difference between an ad and organic content. Now, whether it's kids, their teachers, their grandparents, or their siblings, everyone is the product. The transaction in our use of social media isn't us receiving enjoyment from the platform, it's that the media company is renting our attention to advertisers. This is obvious in television, but much more veiled as we scroll endlessly from a table at a coffee shop or waiting in line at the bank. The more we scroll, the more ads we see, and most importantly, the more information the platform can gather about what we like and what we don't like. This allows the algorithm to feed us the ads we're most likely to engage with. This propels companies and businesses to buy more ad space on platforms because of the sheer targeted data these platforms can offer. This cycle is happening, we are a part of it, and we are being used. The ancient Egyptians who created the first scrolls would probably look at the evolution of their creation with confusion and possibly judgment. Ancient scrolls were the first kind of editable media, and were also a staple of Asian culture for centuries. They're still used as a medium by fine artists today. In traditional Chinese art, there were two types of scrolls, a hanging scroll and a hand scroll. A hanging scroll was displayed on the wall for long periods of time, like we might see now in a museum. But a hand scroll was kept rolled up until the time for viewing, when the owner would get it out of its ornate storage box and ceremoniously unfurl it. These Chinese scrolls share some interesting similarities to modern-day social media. An individual would experience the unfurling like a panorama, seeing different pieces of the painting as it was revealed like a tracking shot in a film. The social dynamics of these hand scrolls were reflected in the papers included on either end, where owners and viewers would write clever commentary about the content. This was an opportunity to improve the painting, and occasionally intellectuals within the literary class would joke that they felt pressure to write something good. This concept made the artwork a continued collaboration across time, a social experience. However, we shouldn't romanticize our use of social media too much, because the dimensions of the ancient scrolls were finite. The social context around them was intimate, and the consumption of them was very intentional. They cultivated a sustained curiosity from their audience. The current idea of scrolling gives the appearance of constant abundance, so much so that we don't even recognize or digest most of what we swipe past. Yet, for some reason, the infinite amount of knowledge and ideas that make us feel like we know everything just because we scroll past it. We could learn a thing or two from these ancient hand scrolls that preach deference to what we do not know. So the question is, can we fix it? Has the infinite scroll really ruined us forever? The Center for Humane Technology, an institution based in San Francisco and co-founded by a former Google employee named Tristan Harris, has tried to warn the world that the digital revolution has made us addicted to likes, retweets, and online validation. In turn, we've become more depressed and distracted than ever. It also suggests that if the infinite scroll went away, we would be able to incentivize living and embrace fewer online interactions. We'd have time for more contemplation and context with limited amounts of content available, and we could support smaller online and real-life communities instead of seemingly having the entire world at our fingertips. Recent calls like these for calm technology support devices that don't capitalize on our dopamine response. They push ideas like the cozy web, a mass space of social media abandoned and replaced with smaller invitation-only chats and forums. The problem, proponents of these ideas say, is not the user, but capitalism. Decentralized and community-owned platforms could be a path forward and channel some of the ideas we saw centuries ago around ancient hand scrolls with their consumption and collaboration. It's not a totally outlandish idea, as we see more and more people walking away from social media. Some who have abandoned it don't even crave an alternative, proving that the addiction isn't really to the product, but to our own neurological responses to it. The most mindful type of scrolling simply isn't scrolling. The infinite scroll might still become the simplest gesture in the history of humankind to bring society to its knees. Take it from its creator, Asa Raskin, who said, "This is a profound moment in our species. We are losing control of the tools we made." Subscriptions are everywhere. Streaming services, software, groceries, even the heating in your car. Companies have convinced us that subscriptions will make our life easier, give us access to way more than we could afford if we had to pay out of pocket for everything. And sure, that might be true. But what they don't want you to know is the real damage that's been done by the subscription economy. This is how subscriptions are poisoning society. The subscription pricing model has gained tremendous levels of traction in the digital age. Almost anyone can hop into the online space, create something, and slap on a subscription fee, often in pursuit of easy, passive income. That's annoying, but not the primary concern of today's episode. Instead, we'd like to explore some shocking discoveries we've learned about subscriptions and reveal an emerging trend that threatens the very essence of the internet as humanity's realm of discovery. And as we dive into the murky world of subscriptions, this episode also explores the powerful psychological tactics used by billion-dollar companies to create the perfect subscription loop. With information being heavily restricted by subscription paywalls, you'll learn the potential impacts that lie ahead of our society and what you can do to stall its effects. Let's hop into the time machine for a bit. How did we get here? A place where every single service and product under the sun requires a monthly fee.
Well, subscriptions certainly aren't new, nor did they begin with Netflix or Spotify. Subscriptions have existed for centuries. Folks in the 1600s had their own share of the subscription craze. Now obviously this was just a matter of convenience. The newspapers realized that they could charge readers for weekly deliveries, and with no internet it was a no-brainer for most people. But with the rise of the digital age, things exploded. The early 2000s signaled what was to come, and we saw the rise of streaming platforms like Netflix, which originally started as a DVD rental by mail service, then slowly transitioned into streaming. Then came the next wave, music. We saw the rise of Spotify, Apple Music, and countless others. At that point, other industries began to perk up with keen attention, especially the software companies. Adobe was one of the biggest adopters, launching Adobe Creative Cloud in 2013, which shifted its products away from one-time purchases to a subscription-based model. Instead of paying once to own a product forever, you now need to pay monthly or yearly to access their tools. No options, no negotiations, and while you may not touch the new features, you're still subjected to the new order. Fast forward to today, and it's not just limited to software or entertainment anymore. Subscriptions have found their way into every corner of our lives. It's actually fascinating how many there are. Fitness apps, meditation apps, productivity tools, even car companies like BMW tried experimenting with subscriptions for heated seats in their luxury vehicles. Yes, heated seats. Now, let's dive into how these companies are able to keep you subscribed. This is where things start to get sneaky. Subscriptions rely on something psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy. Once you've paid for something, you're more likely to stick with it because you've already invested money, even if you're not using the service as much as you thought you would. Money and time are often the ultimate barter. It's a lot like how you're able to pay for a college degree knowing that you're unsatisfied with your major. But what if it's your third year and you've already invested so much? You might as well keep things pushing instead of leaving for the unknown. Now think about something as mundane in comparison to your college major, Netflix or Amazon Prime, and account for entertainment. It doesn't really seem like too much of a deal to leave the subscription active. How often do you renew the payment despite the months you weren't watching anything? It's not a coincidence that the sunk cost fallacy is so present. Subscription models are intentionally designed to create habit loops. They want you to incorporate their services into stuff like your daily routine, making them feel absolutely essential. For example, on Spotify, users get personalized playlists that feel like they know your tastes better than you do. Or on Netflix, the algorithm tends to recommend new shows the second you've completed a series. These tactics are designed to keep you glued to a platform or app and feel like an extension of your natural behaviors. It's like the service is doing all the thinking for you, and in an eerie way, they don't want you to be aware of them as a product. And then there's the free trial trick. Almost every subscription service in existence now offers a 7-day, 14-day, or 30-day free trial. It's a foot in the door. As a company with millions in investments, it's no-brainer to take the initial loss on the road to higher acquisitions. These companies know that signing up is a huge barrier to entry, a hassle even. Yet the allure of free supersedes convenience in our content-loving brains. And at the same time, the struggle of canceling a service, coupled with the fear of missing out on a new trendy show, digital tool, or album, creates another angle towards your inertia. Therefore, you're more likely to stick around longer than you initially intended. The key word here is inertia. Human beings are naturally averse to change, and once we get comfortable with services, despite when they aren't really adding value to our lives, it's extremely difficult to do away with them. The subscription model isn't just about keeping you in a loop, it's actually about survival for businesses too. You might have heard about Tupperware, a company that became famous for revolutionizing food storage. They've been around way longer than most of us on the channel have been alive. Hello, grandpas and grandmas. For decades, Tupperware was a household name, known for its high-quality plastic containers. Nevertheless, Tupperware's once glorious empire has crumbled with it filing for bankruptcy in 2024, mainly because it failed to adapt to new business models. Times change and the climate has to adapt. Just a decade ago, every business on Earth swore by their data-driven models for whatever it was. Nowadays, it's AI-powered, machine learning buzzwords. It's annoying, but in order to survive, you kind of have to get with the times. So, would Tupperware have survived if they chose a pretentious subscription-driven model? Perhaps. Maybe a subscription-based reusable container program for eco-conscious customers, or a smart Tupperware subscription connected to a mobile app that uses AI to track the freshness and availability of food in your home. I don't know. Seriously, anything can be a subscription. For most businesses, how shameless are you willing to be? For investors, how much are you willing to burn for the promise of an IPO? The idea of subscriptions also tie deeply into a concept called economies of scale. This is when a business gets so big, there's a negligible cost of producing a new unit of something. For example, Netflix has already spent millions producing and acquiring new content. The cash burn involved in adding a new subscriber is in many ways nothing, especially since the reward is a significant increase in profits down to the lowest tiered plan. The more subscribers they have, the better their profit margins, and this model is essentially gold for companies. It's the best way to get them guaranteed predictable revenue for months on end. With this model, businesses have little incentive to make their products better. Their main priority is to keep things good enough for you to look away when the charge hits your account. Think about it for a second. How many times have you seen a new update for a subscription service and it doesn't actually feel like an improvement? Probably a lot. At this point, hats off to the user interface and product designers of Earth. The steady paycheck from a brand chasing a new and improved look is keeping the lights on for some great people. So there is a little silver lining. A great example of this terrible practice, though, is the aforementioned Adobe. Prior to Creative Cloud, you could buy Photoshop for a couple $100. Nowadays, there's a $20 subscription per month for individual access. And sure, there's a 7-day free trial available and some student discounts, but the majority of users won't be enjoying those benefits for too long. Now, the price tag doesn't seem like much for some, but think about it. Over the span of 3 years, you'll be buying Adobe a PS5 with an Ultimate Edition of a AAA game, plus a new controller to wrap things up. Even worse, that's just from your pocket for Photoshop alone. Now imagine the plethora of talented artists or design agencies giving them down payments for a suite of tools that would have cost a one-time purchase just a decade ago. While Adobe offers a few tools for free, its signature products are locked behind subscription paywalls, making long-term use unnecessarily expensive. Seriously, I hate Adobe. Things get more alarming once you realize just how corrupt the system has gotten. Subscriptions are now in areas that would perplex the biggest tech hopefuls of the dot-com boom. Want to read an article on a reputable news site? Paywall. An app to compartmentalize ideas? Paywall. The very fabric of the internet and how we engage with it is at risk. Discovery, learning, and exploration were once key attributes of this space. It used to be a place where information flowed freely, and nowadays walls are going up, and information is locked behind subscription-based models. With such a subtle yet powerful shift, it's scary to imagine where things might end up. Information, especially on a vital scale, is becoming increasingly locked within a series of closed, fragmented platforms that are only open to those willing to pay. In the early days of the internet, there was a special type of excitement, one where typing a question into Google offered a treasure trove of information from people with unique ideas, perspectives, and philosophies. It was a wide open library where knowledge flowed freely. Early YouTube reflected that exploratory aura. Every week it felt like there was some new kid that brought a unique form of creativity to the internet. It was a templateless landscape. Now that idealistic era is slowly fading, and paywalls are looking like a guilty suspect. One of the most alarming issues with paywalls is how they're able to restrict access to knowledge and even productivity resources. Today, the aforementioned Microsoft 365 and Adobe have services that are heavily limited by paywalls. And although these services do offer some basic functionality for free or through limited free trials, their most popular tools and fully featured services like Photoshop or Word are subscription-based. Now keep in mind, these are the most popular tools for popular tasks like graphic design or office work. For college-level students and professionals looking to create custom designs or reports, the free versions really won't cut it. Now if you're a student or a low-income individual who wants to improve your situation by learning a skill, there's more holes in your pockets. Much of the news sources we visit are pretty questionable nowadays. The most prominent and influential media corporations we get our daily news from have subscriptions behind them. Are there free news outlets? Yeah, of course. But with a higher public trust and influence from bigger sources, it's embarrassing to witness the model being adopted at scale. We have the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and more. A struggling schmuck doesn't even own these papers either. It's billionaires all the way around. fact-checked verifiable information locked behind a monthly fee. That's cool, I guess. Where else can people get their news? That's where anyone on the internet is free to consume unverifiable info from the flood of free, disestablished sources. High quality and reliable information is now considered a luxury. And it's not like there's a huge elephant in the room that's proudly named profit. Every business has to provide value. Even so, when journalists are working primarily to keep the lights on, how sensational will they get? When content creators are presenting themselves as the news, how much do they make for virality over truth? The goal of everything these days is to keep people coming back for more. Aperture isn't immune. Close to a year ago, we made a video highlighting how Aperture is essentially boring compared to the numbers game landscape of today. It's not an easy job to create a brand and maintain integrity in today's landscape, yet having said that, it is possible to stay true to your philosophy without becoming an embarrassing caricature of your former self. There was a time when the internet was best described as the information superhighway, and that's because resources, data, and ideas could flow freely from person to person or site to site. Today it's like toll gates exist for every 2 miles. There's a problem with being limited to platforms you're subscribed to. If you're on Disney Plus, you're not consuming Netflix content and vice versa. The same thing is going on with news, research papers, and social media platforms that charge for premium features. Want to be the person at the top of X replies? Pay for X premium. It's all a vicious cycle. If creators, journalists, or independent developers want to be seen, their best bet is to join a platform with paid subscriptions. In the process, they might lose ownership of their work, sure, but if content is hidden behind paywalls, fewer people would see it anyway, forcing creators almost to rely on subscriptions a lot more. Let's talk about subscription fatigue. This is a term that's becoming more relevant as people grow weary of managing subscription fees. At first, these services were seen as a convenient and affordable option over purchasing individual items. But now there's way too many services demanding monthly payments, and it's kind of overwhelming. This is where subscription fatigue sets in. Feeling of being drained by a lot of recurring charges, and when they start to add up, you're paying for hundreds of dollars of things that you only ever use 10% of in a month. Think about it, one Netflix show is a speck in the entire library. As a diehard Radiohead fan, you know you're not listening to anything else on Spotify, and yet these payments still feel like a need. Many subscriptions also don't offer clear or easy ways to cancel. With dark patterns or tricky interfaces and hidden menus, you're probably backtracking out of the labyrinth at the first sign of confusion. The worst companies tend to require users to call customer service to cancel. I hate them. Many people deal with gym memberships like Planet Fitness, where cancellations are an entire CIA operation for some users. For others, canceling a membership requires an Academy Award-winning A24 produced script. It could have all been so simple. What happened to the buttons? Premium features are another frustrating aspect of paywalls. On free platforms, there's a tendency for the best features to be reserved for those willing to pay extra. On YouTube, you can watch videos for free, except that YouTube Premium exists for when you'd rather not deal with a constant barrage of ads. That's kind of reasonable, but why would background play and offline downloads be limited to premium? It's like an artificial problem created entirely out of a need to profit from being annoying, and yet it's effective. This pay-to-play model is affecting creators as well. Social media platforms now offer creators an option to hide their best content behind paywalls. On Instagram, there's an exclusive content feature where fans are able to pay for subscriber-only posts. Similarly, YouTube has members. And while this offers a way to make money, there's also limited reach to their content, and this contributes to the overall fragmentation of the internet. It's also impossible to ignore the constant upselling that goes on. After you've subscribed to a service, you're constantly pushed into a higher tier. First you're on the basic tier, and then you're bombarded with offers for premium or pro options. Nowadays, YouTube Premium is pitching a higher bitrate version of 1080p exclusively to its paying users. On DoorDash, its Dash Pass offers you free deliveries and exclusive deals. Cool, but the best bang for your buck is actually staring right in your face, and it's an empty pantry. These systems are primarily designed to squeeze money out of you, and they're pretty shameless about it. Interestingly enough, once you're where they want you to be, it's like they disappear. Prior to using Spotify Premium, every 5 business days there was a new email offering 3 months of premium for the small price of your banking details. And now that you're in, they're hiding. They don't want to be seen or remembered as a business in your inbox, Their only aim is to exist as an obscure charge to your bank account. While the internet once thrived on creativity and user-centric design in its early days, it's moved from a place where the best experiences were created for users to a commercialized space. Priorities have shifted fully. Instead of making it a better place for users, companies are laser-focused on maximizing profits at all costs. This shift is sometimes referred to as an enshittification, a term coined by tech critic and writer Cory Doctorow. It describes how platforms over time tend to degrade in quality for the average user. This happens because companies, in the pursuit of higher profit, slowly but surely tend to make the experience much worse. Things get more frustrating and manipulative. At the heart of this behavior, you'll find companies that offer subscription services. Businesses lock more features behind paywalls or introduce new and convoluted ways to keep users paying without offering any extra value. It's getting much worse, and we're suffering for it. The entire tech industry serves as the backbone of the internet, and many monopolies exist across the board. These companies have one top priority, and it's not the users. It's down to the investors and advertisers. Here's a quick dive into how tech companies work nowadays. First, some ambitious team meets with a Peter Thiel or Elon Musk type venture capitalist, and the kid is marketable for Silicon Valley. The next, Zuckerberg, even. A few $1 million are invested into the idea, and some high-profile connections are tapped, and interviews with major platforms like CNBC are arranged. Maybe a Forbes article? Definitely worth throwing in for good measure. As the hype snowballs, demand grows, and more money is poured into marketing and expansion. Influencers and content creators swear it's the next big thing, and they're probably sounding super convincing. For the most marketable and popular apps, the expansion feels endless. New regions are unlocked, new users are hooked, and every potential corner of the market is tapped. But by now the millions of dollars have been sunk into this venture, and the company might not have even made a single cent of profit. The goal isn't immediate returns, it's growth, and with this burning pile of cash, competition is easily outpaced either by being bought out or squashed. So why does this have to happen? For venture capitalists and investors, the play is simple. Grow the company, dominate the market, and aim for the promised land of going public. Inflate the company's valuation and get those shares sold and make a killing. The actual success of the business is somebody else's problem. The examples of subscription-based companies that follow this template are endless, but we've seen many over the years. Another success besides Spotify and Netflix is Dropbox, a file hosting service. Meanwhile, we've seen the failure of companies like WeWork, a startup with millions in investment that promise subscription-based co-working spaces and communal living. There's also the short-lived, short-form streaming platform Quibi, and the ambitious $300 million news subscription product from CNN+, which was shut down just a month after its launch. Launching a business and getting investments is by no means a bad idea, but here's the issue. The internet of today is so profit-focused that it's difficult to imagine any genuine innovation without money involved. Investors are extremely short-sighted, and company founders need money to keep the lights on. Nobody wants to take on heavy risks, it's just not the subscription models that are dealing with this. You'll find it in every industry. For example, when Marvel was set to explore some new creative directions for its Marvel Cinematic Universe, it began to struggle. What was the solution? Bring back tried and tested successes like Robert Downey Jr. and the Russo brothers. Does your voice matter to internet companies? Not really, no. Sure, there's campaigns and moments where they leave encouraging comments on TikToks and send goodies to a few fans once in a while, as long as the cameras are rolling. The regular day-to-day customer doesn't really get that sort of special treatment though. One example of the internet's degradation is in customer support. As companies continue to expand their subscription models, there's little effort or care being expressed for the actual customer. Take a quick look at major platforms like Amazon, Netflix, Adobe, and Spotify. Even EA, a gaming company. Yes, Electronic Arts, the bane of every gamer's existence. We've seen countless moments where the company's customer support has been very unhelpful, especially in relation to hacks and account linking. Despite this, they are notorious for their highly criticized subscriptions from battle passes in games like Apex Legends and Battlefield 2042. Now, when dealing with customer support from popular companies, you'd expect that their billions of dollars will afford them the best support specialists, right? The answer to that is a resounding no. You're going to be funneled into an endless loop of chatbots, automated phone systems, and outsourced customer support teams with no context about your issue. Many companies will pass you between departments, or worse, between machines. This constant back and forth leaves users frustrated and without a real solution to their issue.
It's all thanks to a race to cut costs and maximize revenue. Companies have now fully outsourced their support systems, and some have replaced them entirely with AI-powered bots. It's efficient for their bottom line, but paying customers are often left with subpar experiences, especially when dealing with hefty monthly fees and redundant updates. Support just isn't what it used to be. It's now another victim of the enshittification process, where profit comes before user experience. Platform silos are already a growing problem with the internet. With the dominance of platforms like Amazon, we're witnessing tightly controlled ecosystems where you're only presented with content that fits your subscription needs. With the dominance of platforms like Amazon, we're witnessing tightly controlled ecosystems where you're only presented with content that fits your subscription package. Amazon Prime is a prime example. With a subscription, there's no need to engage with new storefronts or platforms. Instead, you have access to tons of benefits that will keep you engaged. Meanwhile, Amazon is burning through piles of cash to keep you on Prime. It has Twitch, which as a platform is literally unprofitable. The cost of running the servers and other charges makes it a bust for most organizations. For Amazon, it's a marketing tool that's worth its weight in popularity and influence. Twitch Prime is an important part of the web of control, and it needs subscribers to feel a lot like this stuff is free, although users are actually paying. Other platforms have tried using the Twitch method for years. We saw Mixer, Facebook Gaming, and YouTube Live attempting to put up a decent fight. Amazon just has way more to gain from the success of Twitch, especially with the relevance of Amazon Web Services subsidiary, which powers the platform. So if you're a live streamer with unconventional ideas that don't fit into the mold of Twitch, where do you go? Find an alternative platform most likely, but that's not really easy either. New platforms usually come with a fair share of restrictive rules, and users are going to be unwilling to leave, especially with existing subscriptions. These monopolistic practices stifle discovery and innovation, creating an internet where a select few platforms are able to dictate what most people can see, share, and engage with. Our current shift towards enshittification means that users are no longer a priority on the internet. Instead, users have become the product, and they are milked for every penny possible. Subscription fees, upselling tactics, and data-driven marketing strategies are the new keys to success. What's worse is that companies can't attempt to go back to the way things used to be. Everywhere is cutthroat, and if you show a sign of slowing down with the acquisition meta, you're going to lose big. To illustrate how brutal and profit-focused the space has become, let's take a look at Blizzard Entertainment, the publishers behind World of Warcraft and Overwatch. In 2010, during the release of its StarCraft II, a game that took years of development and millions of dollars in resources, Blizzard brought in a surprising amount of money from it, but not as much as a $15 in-game horse in World of Warcraft than the entire revenue of StarCraft II at launch. Imagine for a second, as a lover of artistic integrity and value, the losses are probably worth it in exchange for a profound gaming experience. To investors though, you're nothing but a joker. After witnessing that sort of market for microtransactions, the gaming industry has only continued to hammer on live subscription models and cosmetics. Companies tend to milk the things that can bring in frequent revenue. To them, investing in long-term user-focused innovation is a waste of time. With that shift, the user inevitably suffers. And we can see that in the current state of many industries. Popular and successful on the outside, but on the inside, millions of dollars are burned to make more money. A money trail that tells no stories, helps no lives, and inspires nobody, leading back to the emptiness it all began with. Subscriptions, for all their conveniences, pose an uncomfortable irony in which we criticize them. Yet we actively participate in the system and continue to perpetuate its existence. From streaming services to software, the people who criticize the subscription trap are often those who sign up for multiple monthly subscription plans. So how is it that we can beat the exploitative model when they thrive precisely because we buy into it? Take a moment to consider how people justify their subscriptions. You'll often hear, "I hate how everything has a monthly fee now," and yet we eagerly sign up for Amazon Prime or Netflix. These services thrive not just because the companies push them, but also because we've convinced ourselves that they're really necessary. Which is kind of what they want. This moral dilemma arises from the reality that for many people, these subscriptions provide some legitimate value. The real tension exists in the fact that we know we're being taken advantage of in some ways. We've got auto-renewals, upselling price hikes, and more. We also feel dependent on these services. They're so embedded in our daily lives that canceling feels more of a burden to tolerating the financial drain. It's a cycle of reliance. Companies are aware that they've built something we can't easily live without, and that's why the subscription model works so well. It's a trap, but it's a trap we walk into willingly. Things get murkier when we look at how some people navigate the subscription fatigue, through piracy. In many ways, the people who oppose subscriptions turn to piracy as a way to avoid paying content they feel should be freely available, or priced better. From movies to video games to music, entire industries have been impacted by piracy. This has quickly elevated its status as a gray market response to digital monopolies and walled-off content. Yet, piracy presents its own set of moral dilemmas. On one hand, it feels like a solid way to fight against what many see as pure corporate greed. Why pay a subscription fee for content that used to be free or at least more accessible? On the other hand, piracy often takes revenue away from much smaller creators who rely on the very platforms that people want to avoid. In the context of movies, independent films, or indie games, pirating hurts the very people who are struggling under the weight of a subscription-based ecosystem run by major corporations. The dilemma is clear. By pirating, you probably feel like you're rejecting an unfair system, but you could be harming creators who are just trying to make a living. Piracy, therefore, isn't a solution, but rather a symptom of frustration from living in a subscription-based society. Is your win worth a loss for many others? It's important to recognize that not every company or creator is rolling in profits thanks to their subscription models. Many of them are actually trapped in the same system they uphold. For some businesses, offering a subscription is no longer a luxury or an option, it's a matter of survival. Like with the gaming industry example earlier. Season passes and battle passes have become an almost mandatory aspect of modern multiplayer games. Without them, developers simply can't afford to sustain their games post-launch. It's not just games either. Many creators and companies are stuck in this dilemma. Patreon and other similar platforms are now lifelines for creators. Despite this, the push for monthly subscriptions puts on additional pressure for their audience. As much as we might want to support our favorite creators, the constant demand for recurring payments from multiple platforms can feel overwhelming. It's a vicious cycle, really. Creators need to charge monthly fees to survive, but the more they charge, the more people feel the fatigue of too many subscriptions. The realities of capitalism exist at the root of all of it. In a free market, businesses are often incentivized to pursue profits wherever they can, and subscriptions offer a steady and reliable source of income. But it's not all about companies making money. Survival is an increasingly important factor in such a competitive market. The subscription model allows companies to project future earnings, keep investors happy, and maintain cash flow in ways that traditional one-time purchases don't. As a result of this status quo, capitalism has driven companies to exploit the subscription model in ways that aren't always fair to consumers. Many businesses don't need to charge exorbitant fees to stay afloat. Take Amazon Prime, for example, where users are occasionally offered discounts if they decide to cancel their subscription. Some of these discounts are pretty huge, so it makes you wonder why the initial price was set, especially if the company won't be bothered by a price reduction. The irony here is that while capitalism promotes competition, the subscription model often leads to monopolistic behavior. Once a company locks you into its ecosystem, leaving becomes very difficult. Companies aren't actually competing to provide the best service possible, instead they're trying to trap you in a system that's hard to escape. Subscriptions aren't inherently evil. As we've explored throughout this episode, it's safe to say that they're simply a symptom of a larger, more systemic issue. One rooted in the structures of capitalism, convenience culture, and our own complicity. We live in a world that's increasingly driven by recurring payments, where access to information and other valuable needs are locked behind paywalls. In turn, we as consumers have normalized this because we've been conditioned to believe that this is just how things are now. Here's something to take away from all this. It does not have to be that way. There are better alternatives out there. For instance, by supporting open source software like Affinity or Blender for visual artists, there can be a little less reliance on subscription-based platforms. You can also back creators directly through their own off-platform projects or via platforms like Patreon. Although it's not a perfect solution, it's a conscious effort that can be a catalyst for more permanent changes in regulation when the time comes. These models offer more control and transparency than the endless loops of subscription fatigue. The key takeaway here isn't to swear off subscriptions altogether. Many services do provide real value, and not every company is out to exploit its users. Instead, we owe it to ourselves to become more conscious consumers, to push for better forms of support that don't rely on endless cycles of payments. By advocating for change and creating awareness instead of reinforcing docility, we can shift the tide. So, as you continue to navigate this landscape of subscriptions, remember that they're not the cause, but rather a reflection of a broader issue. Change lies in the choices we make as consumers. By the way, this is your sign to cancel that subscription that has been bothering you from the moment you read this video's title. Every choice you've ever made is a result of the combination of all the experiences you've had, things you've learned, and people you've met. So what happens when an algorithm designed to make the most money for corporations decides the experiences you have, things you learn, and people you meet? The For You page on social media platforms like TikTok acts like a warped mirror, reflecting back a distorted vision of reality. As you bask in your reflection, you're slowly drawn into something sinister. A digital mirror that starts with truths, but slowly manipulates your desires and beliefs. As trends and viral content shape your perception, you might find yourself wondering where certain thoughts come from, leading you further down a rabbit hole. Well, we found what's at the end of the hole, and it isn't pretty. Today you'll learn the science behind algorithms, the disturbing truth about echo chambers, and the final act of thunderous applause we're all heading towards. Picture this. You're in a massive control room filled with supercomputers and fancy sensors. In front of you is your trusty smartphone displaying your social media feed. It's the typical setup where your boredom reaches its peak. Time to scroll for a bit. Every time you hover over a video for a split second longer than usual, the computer records it. Every time you double tap, it's recorded. Every share, comment, and even half scroll is recorded. It's almost like each trace of hesitance or decisiveness is recognized by the machine. But why? This isn't Skynet, it's just memes and things you like. Well, it's all done to build a profile of you, and this profile version of you works based on something instinctive, maybe even primal. Generally, when you interact with your feed, it's not like there's any anxiety or thought going into it, you're just doing what feels natural. Here's the twist, though. Soon enough, the computer figures out what makes you tick. It hacks your algorithm first. Once that's done, the next step in the takeover begins, and it's not just about throwing stuff in that you like. It's about gaining your trust, keeping you watching, and bringing in the end of free will. The TikTok For You page, or FYP, is a prime example of modern algorithms and the power they hold in the 21st century. Before the For You page came along, algorithms generally felt like some mysterious back-end way to control users. Mostly shrouded in secrecy, we finally got a public idea of how this stuff works in 2021. When we saw major companies like Meta scrambling in the US Supreme Court, attempting to explain how their algorithms functioned. Sure, that enlightened the public a bit. However, it wasn't until TikTok's boom that most people got a real look at algorithmic supremacy and the dangers we stand to face. It's like a new arms and space race, but we are the nuclear arsenal, and the puppet masters can't wait to throw us at ourselves. Algorithms offer an advanced way to blur the lines between personalization and manipulation. They first analyze the stuff you've interacted with, then they proceed to predict what you will interact with. Remember, it's not a human, it's a diligent and scarily efficient machine.
It's easy to fall into the trap of mindless scrolling, consuming content that won't add any meaningful value to your life. But the first step to preventing brain rot is to take control of the content you consume and your online experience in general.
For TikTok, two main things drive the algorithm: machine learning and behavioral data. There's a lot of underlying engineering behind all of it, but those concepts stand at the forefront. It's not just there to react to your actions, it's learning from you, refining its predictions and improving. Unlike social media a decade ago, TikTok's algorithm is very aggressive. Older platforms like Facebook and pre-dumpster fire Twitter were benevolent in the tech scene. They showed users content from people they follow and sprinkled in suggestions once in a while. Meanwhile, on TikTok, the following tab simply exists to give you the illusion of choice. Don't believe me? Answer truthfully. How often do you find yourself scrolling through your TikTok following tab? Probably like 5% of the time you spend on the app, maybe less. Even crazier, the following tab is designed to feel subpar to your explore page. Once you've gone through like 15 videos on your following, it starts to recommend the same videos you saw 5 minutes ago. Now sure, you could refresh it hoping for a change, but at that point, the algorithm knows you'll pick the easier road, which is to swipe left and head back to the explore page. It's like, do you want to go back to the thing that just disappointed you? Or give in and confide in the warm embrace of an algorithm that knows exactly what you should be seeing right now? The Explore page's prominence is all-encompassing. You're constantly exposed to videos that are hyper-tailored to certain aspects of its internal idea of you. Slowly but surely, it reinforces you into being comfortable with the idea that it has your convenience in mind. TikTok doesn't just care about the videos you like, though. Overt positivity is never going to give advertisers the most money, so trust that they are taking things a step further. In this case, TikTok learns about your preferences, desires, envies, vices, and even your fears. Let's break down the stuff they're watching. If you're an amateur TikTok creator, take this as a free mini crash course on what you should be looking out for. The algorithm categorizes videos based on metrics like hashtags, metadata, and most recognizably, sounds. So, hashtag FYP is a very redundant thing to have in your TikTok, just so you know. Instead, hashtags are best used for sorting content into categories like gaming, dance videos, cooking, or other sub-niches or interests. Next, we've got the metadata. In a nutshell, this is just data about data. The computer has your information as a user, but it also has to make sense of all of it in order for the learning part of machine learning to actually matter. Metadata sorts all the information it gets from you and puts it into categories that are arranged internally. Another interesting way TikTok groups content is according to a user's emotional state. If you're feeling sad, happy, anxious, or excited while watching certain types of videos, it records that data and tries to push content that matches your mood. With advanced emotion tracking features, TikTok is able to sense your facial expressions or tone of voice in videos. Think about it, when you watch content with a sad tone, you might sigh or have a solemn expression. TikTok actually keeps track of these moments through your camera and microphone, which makes it easier for the algorithm to push content matching your specific mood. And finally, there's sounds. This one is pretty simple. Did you enjoy a video using a specific sound? TikTok will recommend videos with that sound to you even more. Why? Because sound tends to have a certain format behind their use, so it's easier for the algorithm to push successful videos that use the same ones. All social media platforms tend to have some type of recommendation algorithm embedded into them. However, TikTok's For You page stands at the top due to some critical differences. The For You page is wicked fast. Within just a few swipes, it can start tailoring your content to an eerie degree of efficiency. Meanwhile, platforms like Meta tend to take much longer to fine-tune what they show you. That's probably because, unlike TikTok's quick-fire algorithm, they're actually obligated to care about the people you follow and relationships you've built over time. These older platforms have entire legacies based on user-curated selections. Now, the formula for content consumption has changed, so it's hard for them to keep up. On platforms such as YouTube and Facebook, users tend to come across suggested content in random bits. There's no rush to it. At least that's how those platforms were in the past. Nowadays, they're trying to do the TikTok thing, but with inferior algorithms. Meanwhile, TikTok has condensed the entire experience into one giant, endless scroll. Even scarier, every video you see is hyper-focused in its recommendation for you. No distractions, just bullseyes. Alright, let's take a step back. The algorithm is all-knowing and all-powerful, at least as far as we've explained it thus far. But this content has been tailored towards your preferences. Sure, it's addicting, but that's not necessarily a world-ending type of bad. So why should anyone care? Here's the part where things take a darker turn. Your favorite actor just wore the most amazing outfit for a red carpet appearance. You are in awe, and in that moment you decide that you want a similar body type. So you hop onto TikTok and check out some dieting tips. You watch a few videos, save info in your notes app, the usual routine. Later that day you open TikTok again and it has recorded your diligent research focused on dieting. Your use of keywords was particularly insightful for the machine. Weight loss, healthy diet, home exercises, and the like. It can sense that you enjoy videos with noticeable changes in a short span of time. And it's ready to make things happen. Your algorithm begins to feed you more intense fitness content. None of the mild stuff. Before you know it, you're in a rabbit hole of extreme dieting content. Not because you asked for it, but because you're hooked and it knows that you can't help but watch. The algorithm tends to manipulate your preferences by nudging you into content that might be more engaging, but not necessarily beneficial. Subconsciously, your desires are reprogrammed without any conscious input. You don't just want to lose weight anymore, you suddenly find yourself interested in extreme weight loss methods from videos on your feed. When you open TikTok, you're probably not there to take control. You're there to be entertained, and that's that. Even the act of tapping on the icon lights up your brain with dopamine. The same thing happens when you have a bite of your favorite donut or ace a tough challenge. Each video you like is a quick hit. This is where the For You page gets both brilliant and dangerous. The algorithm knows that unpredictable rewards tend to trigger more dopamine. It's like a magician pulling rabbits out of a hat, keeping your brain chasing that next rush, video after video. The longer you stay, the deeper the loop goes. And here's where the problem lies. That endless loop doesn't challenge your brain or help it grow. You're being spoon-fed content that keeps you passive and engaged. It feels like you're learning, but there's something missing. You're not actually fulfilled. And worst of all, this loop can lead to deep, sinister consequences. It all starts off innocently enough, and there's no better example than this guy. Meet Caleb Kane. In his early 20s, Caleb, like most men his age, was pretty lost. To let off some stress, he turned to YouTube, where he'd watch motivational videos and gaming content. While browsing, he came across Stefan Molyneux, a far-right American YouTuber who tends to get recommended when people watch videos from Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson. The video from Stefan was pretty tame, some content on self-improvement, and Caleb could relate to his difficult childhood. Slowly though, things began to change. It wasn't just self-improvement anymore. The bait was cast and bitten, and Caleb found himself drawn to a recommendation algorithm that pushed him towards more radical creators. Eventually he realized how far he had gone, and pulled himself out of that rabbit hole. Not many young men are so lucky. YouTube's radicalization pipeline has been subject to numerous studies, and experts have noticed a trend. Young men seem to begin with harmless interests. Like Caleb, they begin watching innocent enough content centered on gaming, fitness, and motivation. Eventually, the algorithm learns what keeps them engaged, and they are exposed to more polarizing content. Some people are able to resist and filter their feeds, however, the overwhelming majority are subject to a feed filled with controversial political ideas. It's not just random, it's made to feel like the natural evolution of each young man's interests. Overall, the alt-right pipeline isn't anything new, especially if you've been on the internet for a while. It's a topic that has been beaten to death, sure, but the horse still has a pulse, and maybe a few more smacks wouldn't hurt. We've talked about the algorithm and how it keeps you hooked, but there's an even bigger issue beneath it all. It feels like there's a lot of pressure, and the pot is welded shut. The mental health toll of social media is an even more widespread issue. Dealing with your For You page can feel like you're trapped in a cycle where your self-worth is tied to external validation. And if you're just a lurker or passive user, all the signs on your feed are designed to feel like your lifestyle is wrong. It's like there's an invisible voice claiming that you should be posting consistently, sharing your life with strangers, and craving the external validation tied to views, likes, and shares. Now, if you're the type that enjoys posting, there's a lot to worry about. Plus, the bigger you get, the more pressure builds up. If you think you can handle the feedback loop, then go for it. Here's the catch, though. External validation is addictive. The more you get, the more you crave, and soon you'll find yourself checking your phone constantly, waiting for the next like or comment to give you that quick hit. You can take it from experts. According to the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, teenagers who spend more time on social media are more likely to experience symptoms of depression and anxiety. If you're a teenager, there's no surprise in the slightest. It's just another fact, like hearing the sky is blue. Here's the thing, though. Even though it feels obvious, the impact on your mental health is real. That's why we'll get to explore real things you can try in order to get better. Alright, when was the last time you and your friends were watching the same stuff, like sports? Nah, one of them's working too late. Marvel's show? Well, Marvel's fallen off. Maybe later. Severance? Wait, people use Apple TV? Like, it's confusing. In real life, trying to stay on the same wavelength with your community feels almost impossible. There's barely any chance for a water cooler moment anymore. A moment to discuss last night's big TV show or football game. Everyone's watched something different on their own, but you know where you can find people who watch your preferred content. That's right, social media. Cultural monoliths once bound us together. Like it or not, everyone had a common topic to discuss. Now, even in our households, it's like there's completely different realities taking place. Someone's binge watching cooking tutorials while the person in the next room is drowning in political memes and shocking headlines. Gone are the days when social media was a place to follow like-minded people from your community. Now even basic conversations with old friends feels like trying to decode a cryptic language. There's so many inside jokes you'll never understand simply because they're scrolling in a different timeline. You've probably felt it too. A major shift that happened with the internet in 2016, the American presidential elections. Prior to those elections, America's divisiveness was mostly prevalent among older millennials and baby boomers. 8 years later, and it's like things have flipped upside down. Now loud voices from the left and right dominate the discourse, debating ceaselessly over countless issues. It's no longer about politics, but culture, identity, and everything in between. If we had to pick the most insidious effects of the For You page, echo chambers would be at the top of our list. Take a look at political content, left-leaning, right, or somewhere else. Once the machine learns your preferences, it starts to narrow your exposure, revealing a large amount of content that aligns with a specific political ideology. Over time, this makes viewers develop a tough external shell, one that rejects opposing viewpoints and firmly keeps people rooted in their beliefs. It gets even worse, though. People who hold different opinions aren't just worthy of a disagreement, they should be distrusted. Along the way, you might start to question everyone's intelligence or morality. Why does this happen? Well, most likely your For You page has led you down a worldview that props itself up as the objective truth and valid direction. In extreme cases, this leads to radicalization, and at the least extreme, it leads to division. Make no mistake, the world has always been a place filled with polarization. Human beings enjoy a good debate. PlayStation or Xbox, Yanny or Laurel, the harmless stuff. Nowadays, though, everything is at an extreme. With social media algorithms, the problem gets exacerbated, turning harmless differences into battlegrounds of belief. Alright. Do we sound a bit too centrist for your tastes? Allow us to paint a picture of radicalization. To do that, we'll have to talk about memes. Yes, memes, quick-witted, funny, and spreading like a wildfire. Everybody loves a good meme. In just a few seconds, a meme can strongly convey an idea. Thanks to the way they work, the best memes are easy to digest. Yet memes aren't just lighthearted and fun, at least not all the time. They can be powerful tools of manipulation, and manipulation is a key word that repeats itself down this For You page rabbit hole. Most memes start off with a kernel of truth. They present information in a way that feels factual, even when it's oversimplified or outright false. If you've played video games for a while, you're probably familiar with the term NPCs, non-playable characters. Around 2018, a meme started off where people who weren't part of a certain community were considered NPCs. It's nice to have your own little bubble where everyone else who doesn't get it feels like a random computer-generated character. It's relatable for gamers and it fosters a sense of community with your fellow non-NPCs. And now that there's an inside joke with the community, it's easier to influence the people within. Take it from the incel communities. What are the truths they begin with? Let's be honest, dating in the modern world can be difficult, and many people, particularly guys, tend to deal with a fair amount of rejection, loneliness, and feeling overlooked in society. Especially when their social media is filled with idealized relationships and a lot of value placed on physical attractiveness. These are real emotions, and many of them can relate to this. If you encountered a YouTuber that voiced out these things, you'd probably nod in agreement and might feel inclined to hear what else they have to say. The problem is that those frustrations only get amplified within a community of like-minded, downtrodden young men. What starts off as feelings of disappointment can quickly turn into a toxic environment, one that reinforces a victim mentality. It becomes an echo chamber, and over time, this worldview becomes more rigid and extreme. Often, you're not even aware you're being lied to. It's like a part of you has found comfort in finally hearing a voice willing to tell the truth. Instead of dancing around a topic, it's nice to have a trustworthy source that's willing to spill nothing but facts. It's a calming feeling to trust a creator, to trust us. But what if we've lied to you before? Earlier in this video, we discussed TikTok's content categories, highlighting how the platform's algorithm creates the perfect For You page for each user. One of the things we mentioned was how TikTok is capable of tracking a user's emotional state through their smartphone camera and microphone. That was just a lie. It's not a complete stretch to imagine that the platform is capable of doing such things, however, it's factually incorrect. If we hadn't pointed this out, that little kernel of misinformation could have created a myriad of reactions. Some viewers might react with increased anxiety and paranoia, while others might begin to believe inaccurate judgments about data privacy. And on the extreme end, we might even get a few birds or CIA robot fans from the Aperture fan base, which, while entertaining, isn't really quite what we're going for. Here's where things get philosophical. One of the most unsettling questions of the digital age is this: are we really making our own choices anymore? Or are we simply following fragments of free will littered like fireflies, leading us deeper into an inescapable maze? The death of free will has haunted our species for centuries. Sentience is a privilege that took us to the stars, but the bane of our existence lies in the arrogance of believing we're always in control. In philosophy, there's a concept that perfectly encapsulates this modern dynamic dance we have with the For You page. It's called determinism. It's an idea that all events, including our human actions, are predetermined by pre-existing causes. Think of your For You page as a result of your past behaviors, your browsing patterns, interactions, and clicks. All those past actions are shaping the digital choices you'll make tomorrow. It's an invisible feedback loop that slowly guides your behavior, all without you noticing. We've actually made a video on this before, and you should check that out if you'd like a deep dive into the dangers of infinite scrolling. The internet wasn't always this way. For a long time, it was a peaceful beach filled with endless waves of opportunity. Much like what we did to real beaches, the internet is no longer pristine. The seashells of novelty are gone, and in their place we've got a shoreline littered with digital garbage. Nothing but subtle, ironic ads that blend into the landscape. It's almost poetic, being reminded of Coca-Cola's existence thanks to a plastic bottle that washed ashore. Back then, you would type random searches into Google, click on fancy new blogs, and stumble upon obscure forums, and enjoy the beauty of it all. The internet was vast, decentralized, and designed for us to get lost in the endless possibility of what we might find. No Reddit thread filled with armchair experts deciding the answers to every question. Sure, modern answers are more useful, but there was something charming about Yahoo Answers and the downright ridiculous replies people usually got to questions. There was no SEO sorting for common sense, it was just people being their authentic, humorous, and stubborn selves. The content wasn't curated for any metrics in a room somewhere. Discovery is gone, and in its place we have pure consumption. The algorithm ensures that you are attended to, which sounds great in theory, but it limits your exposure to the unexpected, uncomfortable, and unfamiliar. Science has shown us that going through the unknown is when our best learning happens. It's no fun being told what's right. Instead, it's nice to find solutions through trial and error, acknowledging the disappointment of failure, stepping up and finding courage to find answers. Journey before destination. Would it have been satisfying if Frodo and the Fellowship marched straight into Mount Doom without a hitch? And a tale of really competent hobbits solving every problem with ease. Who would care about that? The journey with all of its painful obstacles is what made their story meaningful. This raises an important question. If the internet has become so controlled and personalized, is there room left for true autonomy? Or are we just passive consumers, led through a digital landscape where thoughts and choices are predetermined by the platforms we use? Nowadays, one of the clearest examples of free will's erosion is in hyper-targeted advertising. Tech companies have perfected the art of predicting consumer behavior on a dangerous level. It's to the point where they might be able to influence purchasing decisions without the user ever realizing what's going on. Now, you might want to believe that you're choosing to buy a certain product. Meanwhile, in reality, you've been nudged in that direction for weeks, all thanks to the subtlety of tailored content. It's not just products that are our biggest concern. Algorithms are influencing the way we vote, the media we consume, and even the people we spend our lives with. In today's digital space, tech giants like Google stand at the top of a massive row of dominoes. With 92% of all traffic dedicated to Google search, it's hard to trust results provided by a single organization. A recent court case against Google has raised serious concerns about how tech companies have the ability to manipulate users through their monopoly on information. With Google's search algorithm, much like TikTok's For You page, users aren't just given the most relevant information. Instead, you're giving information deemed most likely to keep you engaged. Unfortunately, this isn't always in our best interests. Where are we headed with all this? It seems like the For You page's influence reaches far beyond the fabric of entertainment. Instead, it trails down to our politics, culture, and even how we perceive each other. The insidious machine has forced our society into bubbles of isolation, and we're floating with uncertainty about when they might burst. billions of bubbles popping simultaneously, heralding the end of liberty in a thunderous applause. Convenience is amazing. Who doesn't love access to stuff with the push of a button? However, every warning about a dystopia has been cautionary about the erosion of freedom under the guise of comfort and convenience. With stories like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World published in 1932, we explored a world that was set into a dystopia through the manipulation of pleasure and control, instead of overt authoritarian oppression. Huxley's vision was a society that was largely pacified thanks to the spread of drugs and superficial pleasures. But on a larger scale, we're being pacified with endless and constant access to modern pleasures, shaping our preferences and perspectives without us realizing it. Recently, ADHD diagnoses have skyrocketed considerably, in no doubt thanks to the attention economy we live in. It's hard for minds to stay focused in a world of convenience and instant dopamine rushes. We've seen some seismic shifts in culture and politics since the algorithms became more advanced. Think about how quickly internet trends transition into the real world. Take the infamous devious lick trend, where TikTok challenges led teenagers to steal or vandalize school property for virality. What started as a joke ended up costing schools thousands of dollars in damages, disrupting entire communities. It's not just harmless pranks or petty vandalism, the For You page has shaped more serious topics and societal movements. From radical political ideologies to the manosphere, we've seen some questionable ideas gain traction. The little dark age edits of dudes in military gear have slowly transformed into a soundtrack for neo-Nazis to create edits in approval of dangerous ideologies. This isn't the first time we've seen a harmless idea turn into an instrument for vectors of misinformation. Famously, Pepe the Frog, a once innocent cartoon character, was transformed into a symbol of hate somehow. It started off as an internet meme, but now the character is forever attached to a complicated, politically charged history. It's not just Pepe, though. The lines between humor and political discourse feel completely faded. Nowadays, it's hard to distinguish a dog whistle or a coded message from a regular harmless joke. This is by design. The For You page's focus on engagement transcends all, and these are the consequences. When we look at the larger picture, the For You page's true power is clearer than ever. It's not just shaping trends and political beliefs, it's reshaping our true sense of self. With an ability to influence your identity, it slowly reinforces pre-existing biases, limiting growth and critical thinking skills. Ultimately, we have to look in the mirror once more. Now that we can see the true mechanisms of our digital selves, we're beginning to realize that the reflection lacks a distinct element of humanity. Sure, this version of ourselves that the algorithm recognizes is brilliantly curated. It's almost indistinguishable from reality, but there's something missing. Almost like a gift from our evolutionary ancestors. The uncanny valley kicks in, and we instinctively recognize the inhuman. So what does the algorithm get wrong? Potential. This machine has only ever understood humanity based on data it's been fed. Meanwhile, every person on Earth is a culmination of an almost infinite, unfathomable amount of coincidences. Crazy, odd, and downright ridiculous moments that no algorithm could ever predict. The chaos, the randomness, is what truly defines us. And if chaos got us this far, why surrender to a machine's shallow understanding of order? As a species, the time has come to break out of these invisible cages. We have to actively seek out new perspectives, challenge our own biases, and take conscious control of our digital consumption. Only then can we avoid becoming mere products of an algorithm. Standing at this crossroads, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer power of algorithms that are able to shape our identities. But the truth is that we've evolved beyond the control that these machines are capable of establishing. We just need to tap into the confidence we found millions of years ago when we discovered new ways to live. So the next time you open up your For You page, remember, it's not just entertainment or a distraction, it's shaping you in ways you might not even realize. The question is, will you let it? Or will you step outside the algorithmic bubble, embrace the unknown, and rediscover your true potential? The choice, as always, is yours.
Once upon a time, there was a wild pig and a sea cow. The two were best friends who enjoyed racing against each other. One day, the sea cow got injured and couldn't race any longer, so the wild pig carried him down to the sea, where they could race forever, one on land and the other in the water. If you were born into the hunter-gatherer Aita community in the Philippines, you would have grown up listening to this story, and indeed, no matter where you grew up in the world, most of us heard stories that echoed sentiments like this. While they may seem like mere fables on the surface, there's a lot to learn from them. Things like friendship, cooperation, and equality. In the past, stories like these permeated our culture from childhood to old age. But the world has changed a lot since our hunter-gatherer days. Stories that teach us about our sense of community are now limited to children's fables and no longer circulate through our culture as we get older. While in the past the job of passing on necessary life skills, history, and information was a collective effort, today all of that power has been given to commercial media. In the words of George Gerbner, commercial media has eclipsed religion, art, oral traditions, and the family as the great storytelling engine of our time. And whoever tells the stories of culture gets to govern human behavior. And therein lies the biggest problem with commercial storytelling. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, all the different news apps and websites. How many times do we check the news on our phones every day? In the past, it took weeks, months, or even years to hear bad news from the other side of the world. But today we have everything at our fingertips. Wars, riots, chaos, scandals. The news feels inescapable. It's like we're trapped in a constant reel of negative information on all platforms and from every news outlet. If you strip it down to its roots, the message behind it all is always the same. One that plays on our emotions and instills fear in our hearts, warning us against a world filled with people who want to hurt us, ideologies that threaten ours, and unexpected events that are meant to keep us on high alert. But is the world really as bad as mass media wants us to believe? Or are we suffering from mean world syndrome? In the 1970s, Dr. George Gerbner first coined the term mean world syndrome while conducting research on the effects of violent-related content on our view of the world. His findings showed that a heavy diet of violence, whether through entertainment or the news, can lead to a sort of cognitive bias that makes us perceive the world as more dangerous than it actually is. What is the most interesting about Gerbner's research is that it doesn't matter whether we know the content we're consuming is factual, like a news report, or fictional, like a movie, the effect is the same. When we're constantly bombarded with negative information, we begin to develop a worldview that is highly skeptical, suspicious, and pessimistic. As part of this study, Gerbner estimated that the average American child will have watched over 8,000 murders on television before the age of 12. Consider the fact that Gerbner conducted his research in the 1970s, when the media's influence and its reach were substantially smaller, and you can imagine just how bad it must have gotten. How many murders, both real and fictional, do you think a child would have read, seen, or heard about in the media before the age of 12? 8,000 or 8 million? If that was the only problem with the media, then perhaps it won't be that horrible. After all, if bad things are happening, they need to be reported, right? Well, yes, but Gerbner said something while testifying before a US Congressional Subcommittee in 1981 that will send chills down your spine. Fearful people are more dependent, more easily manipulated and controlled, more susceptible to deceptively simple, strong, tough, and hardline measures. Could it be that the media is designed to serve people the worst news to instill fear in us so we can be more easily controlled by the powers that be? This point becomes even more plausible when you consider the fact that 90% of the media in the United States is controlled by just 6 corporations. This means that roughly 232 media executives are calling the shots on the vast majority of the news being presented to Americans, which is then passed on across the globe. Let's say the situation isn't as sinister as that and we aren't being subversely controlled by some criminal masterminds. At the very least, CNN, Fox, and all the other outlets want one thing: our attention, and some of them will do anything to get it. People are more likely to pay attention to and remember negatives. Media outlets know this, which is why you'll find more negative news than positive news in your feeds. It's polarizing, engaging, and keeps us glued to our screens, which in turn results in more revenue for advertisers who are literally paying for our attention. And once we start paying attention, the algorithms of social media take over, and all of a sudden we're constantly being fed news that confirms our beliefs and further solidifies our already skewed worldviews. It's no secret that controversial content, the content that triggers an emotional response, is the content that performs best, gets shared most, and circulates longest. So whether we like it or not, we become bombarded with an endless scroll of polarizing content that only manages to make us even more skeptical about the world around us and suspicious of anyone who does not happen to share the same exact beliefs. This kind of reporting and these stories that we propagate throughout our society end up dividing us instead of bringing us together like the stories of old did. The sad reality is that whether the world is getting worse or not, the media will almost always make us think that it is, simply because it's good for business.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
So we've got our deadly disease.
No, we just have to blame it on something that's in every household, something that people are a little bit afraid of already.
The truth, which should be an unbiased representation of facts, is no longer at the core of news reporting. The story has become much more important, and stories that elicit negative emotions often get more eyeballs, reactions, and ad revenue. As a result, the problems that are constantly depicted in movies, news outlets, and on social media are relentlessly overstated to the point where we might feel it's even hopeless to do anything about them. What's worse is that this constant exposure to negative information that is relentlessly pushed on us by these obsessive algorithms can confuse the brain such that it becomes almost impossible to differentiate between exciting fact and thrilling fiction. A study conducted by 3 MIT scholars in 2018 found that false news spreads on Twitter substantially faster, farther, and deeper than the truth. The research also found that this misinformation wasn't spread through bots, but by actual human users, like you and I, retweeting. Just like these algorithms, our brains recognize that the most polarizing information, whether true or not, is the information that will go viral and elicit the most emotional response from the public. And so we hit share or quote in hopes of getting that viral tweet, without first verifying if the information we're spreading is accurate. Another reason why it seems like the world is substantially worse than what we see in front of us is that the news talks about things that did happen and not things that didn't. We don't hear about wars that never started due to successful peace talks or shootings that were prevented through proper policing. We barely hear when unemployment rates go down and when the economy is experiencing a turn for the better. Because again, it's just not as exciting as bad news. Sadly, as long as terrible things keep happening on the face of this planet, there will always be enough negative reports to fill the news, especially with smartphones now allowing people to become amateur reporters and crime investigators. The mean world syndrome speaks directly to our most innate fears, which then trigger our fight or flight instinct. When we watch a reporter covering a war zone, a shooting in a residential area, or a terrorist threat, our body naturally becomes flooded with hormones and chemicals designed to keep us on full alert in order to save us from the mean and bad world. While these survival characteristics were essential in our hunter-gatherer days, today all they manage to do is lead to anxiety, stress, and even trauma. But the world isn't as bad as we think it is, only the stories are. This is why to combat mean world syndrome, we have to take back control of how we're thinking, feeling, and reacting to the constant stream of negative or violent news being depicted all around us. The truth is that the world today is much better than it has ever been. Don't get me wrong, humanity is far from perfect. There are still conflicts in many places around the world, human rights issues we need to tackle, climate change problems we need to fix. But the world has never been as good as it currently is, at least for most of us. Advancements in healthcare and technology have increased our lifespans, decreased mortality rates, and improved our living standards. We haven't witnessed any world wars for decades, we've grown more tolerant of each other and more accepting of our differences. Violence has steadily been on the decline since 1946, there have been fewer famine deaths in the past decade than any other time in human history, and extreme poverty has been declining literally by the second. Yes, we face harsh realities on a personal and global scale every single day, but when tragedy, crime, and war are presented as the norm and not the outliers, it's only natural for us to feel angry and afraid. We have to choose our information sources carefully and not let the obsessive algorithms of social media dominate our perception of the world. We have to be conscious of our approach to news and entertainment and challenge the way we think. The next time you're scrolling through your feed and find a disturbing news report, ask yourself, is this fact or fiction? What real evidence is there of this occurrence? What's the context? Or am I just being manipulated so that I'll develop certain feelings of fear and suspicion? If you find your social media platform serving you the same kind of content, be conscious of this and make sure you diversify your newsfeed to include positivity to balance out the negativity. At the end of the day, we're a storytelling species, and if we've learned anything from our history, it's that the narrative we share with one another is the most important thing. Just like in our hunter-gatherer days, the tales we're telling now will have a great influence in shaping our culture and our people. It might be time that we go back to telling stories like the wild pig and the sea cow. Maybe, if we do, we can cultivate the values that truly make us human, like caring for one another, being compassionate, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. The world is not as mean as the media wants you to believe. It's time we stopped letting them lie to us that it is.
Gen Alpha is the first generation of humans to be born with access to mobile technology. By the age of 2, many Gen Alpha toddlers can already interact with these devices in meaningful ways beyond watching CoComelon on YouTube. They can navigate the app menu and even play some simple games. How will this level of access and proficiency with technology shape Gen Alpha? And how will Gen Alpha, in turn, change the world? I want to acknowledge that generations are a strange concept. Grouping people in a roughly 15-year age range into one definable set of characteristics seems reductive in most cases. But there are some instances where this distinction is useful. Generations help group people who experienced and reacted to the same historical and social events within a specific time period. And the truth is that these factors unify people to an extent. When discussing how people are handling the rising cost of housing, for example, generations are a useful shorthand to demonstrate that one group of people will experience this phenomenon very differently than others. Generation Alpha, specifically, is the generation that follows Gen Z, consisting of individuals born between 2010 and 2025. Most of them are still kids, with the oldest ones becoming just teenagers, while the last of them are still being born as we speak. How can we possibly know that they'll change the world when they've yet to learn how to work a part-time job or drive a car? While we can't know for sure what changes they'll bring, we do know of one major factor that influences a generation like no other: technology. We often think of technology as another way for us to express ourselves and our will. However, the 20th century philosopher Marshall McLuhan describes it differently and perhaps more accurately. McLuhan is most well known for this line: "The medium is the message." What he means by this is that the media format has more significant effects on us than the actual content of the message being sent. The format media takes changes our relationships with the message and each other. It conditions us in a specific way. In the words of McLuhan, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. The technology that we develop shares our lives and how we interact with each other in fundamental ways. Excessive screen use literally changes the gray and white matter in young children's brains. It reduces their literacy, their ability to speak, and their comprehension. Families interact less with each other and more with screens. This was true when TVs entered the living room, and it's far worse now thanks to mobile technology. As Gen Alpha gets older, they're being introduced to a medium that has shaped us more than anything else since the dawn of humankind. They're growing up as kids with social media accounts, which will drastically change how they see each other and themselves. With his concept of the global village, McLuhan suggested that TV, radio, and mass communication in general were already changing us from a society of individualism and privacy to a tribal society where everyone watches everyone else. People act and react based on what the larger group knows and believes to be true. Social media has made McLuhan's description of mass media far more relevant. Our new tools have made us hyper-aware of what others think at all times. We affirm the values of the group we belong to, such as the two sides of the culture war. We also fear being outcast by violating the norms of these groups. We become tribalistic. But previous tribal societies were much smaller. You could keep track of most people you came in contact with. With social media, you come in regular contact with thousands of people every single day. Humans have an evolutionary constraint of knowing about 150 people. Beyond that, we experience cortical overtaxing in the brain. With social media, we're connected to thousands of people and in a tribal way. It's not surprising that these platforms are becoming more associated with anxiety and depression. Gen Alpha adolescents are and will be growing up in this tribalistic world with earlier access to social media than any other generation. This not only affects the way they interact with their peers, but according to research in the field of neuroscience, it changes the way they process emotions. Generation Alpha is already entering high school environments. It's the first time that they'll be expected to write papers of considerable length. They may also take up coding and computer science courses or dabble with computer-generated images and art. Unlike previous generations, Alpha will navigate high school with access to generative AI tools to help or completely take care of school projects for them. Some teachers are learning how to recognize what an AI-written paper looks like, but it won't prevent a student from using a program like ChatGPT to give them a draft to work off of. AI is able to code and can be used by students in computer science courses. It can easily handle low-level syntax work that students usually start with. Teachers who still want their students to prove their proficiency will struggle to be able to tell what was supported by AI and what was not. Many students will be missing out on important skills. They'll be dependent on technology in a way we've never seen before. In writing, we're able to generate ideas and bring cohesion to a large subject. The problem though is that if AI is taking the reins of writing, then it's also taking control of ideas and direction. Gen Alpha will become removed from the ideation process. If they do have involvement, it'll be in a higher level direction and decision-making part. How will an entire generation cope when every discussion is just a regurgitation of what's come before? Where will the fresh and novel ideas come from? Gen Alpha kids who were born pre-pandemic will also have experienced or seen the fallout of the global pandemic in 2020. They were physically isolated from their peers while encouraged to engage with them or entertain themselves on screens. This event exploded every digital media trend, and it meant more acquaintance with screens and less with physical human beings aside from their parents. While Gen Alpha is commonly exposed to screens early on, they also spend much more time with their parents, who are primarily millennials. As adults, the millennial generation is also shaped by social media. They're known to teach kids early about mental health, gender norms, and climate change. Millennials are also having fewer kids. They're far more likely to host single-family households than previous generations. This is likely due to large economic disadvantages they have to contend with, such as the price of housing, the cost of student debt, and, well, really just the cost of everything. So, while Gen Alpha are on screens a lot, they're also potentially hearing about the impact of screens on their mental health. Research on Gen Alpha so far suggests that they have some unique strengths and weaknesses compared to previous generations. Their technological literacy is very strong for obvious reasons. They're more open to knowledge and have good numerical intelligence. On the negative side, they tend to be more egocentric, prone to violence, and have short attention spans. These are just generalities and capture a moment in time for a generation that's still very young. In discussing how they will change the world, I think it's important to avoid a couple of common angles you see in the generation discussion. The point isn't to sneer at younger generations like boomers were prone to do towards millennials. The tools that shaped Gen Alpha, after all, were made by the previous generations. The point is to show what possible worlds lay ahead. Another thing to avoid is the blind optimism often displayed by marketers. They're just excited at the prospect of a generation spending more and more and being open to ads. The deciding factor that will lead Gen Alpha down one path or another is tech determinism. Are we doomed to adopt emerging technologies regardless of the harm they cause, or is society-wide resistance possible? There's a strong case for the tech determinists who believe that widespread availability of technology makes social change inevitable. We don't seem to have many mechanisms in society to prevent new technology from taking over. The gurus who design this tech often buy into techno-utopianism. It's a world where all of our problems are solved by technology, and in this version of society, technology progresses in a very straightforward trajectory, from one advancement to the next. And the tech gurus aren't really alone in this assumption. Techno-utopianism has been a typical prevailing attitude for much of the 20th and 21st centuries. It's only recently that so many of us are questioning this reality. It's hard to argue against the inevitability of tech adoption. When an exciting new piece of technology or platform is introduced and is well received, it spreads. All the potential harm it can cause is never really known right away. The impact of social media is still not dissected thoroughly. We only broadly understand that it's having a negative effect on the mental health of people who use it, especially adolescents. Governments and legislation lag behind the data as well. Before any laws are introduced preventing access to harmful tech, there generally needs to be a well-established body of evidence. Governments don't seem well suited to properly legislate against tech platforms in a way that won't easily be skirted or cause unintended consequences. Tech literacy is only so common in policy making. And while plenty of governments legislate based on gut reactions, lobbying, and other less objective criteria, it's not something most of us want to encourage. To prevent tech from causing severe harm, legislation must involve a more scrutinizing approval process. But that comes with its own set of concerns. It could cripple the open internet and require many layers of expensive bureaucracy. It just seems like tech has human welfare beat. The only potential barrier appears to be the one that's nearly impossible to steer: culture. We've become increasingly aware of the issues with excessive screen use and social media follies, and even if we don't have perfect evidence for its impact on our mental state, our first-hand experiences typically suggest it's making us feel worse. Humans are capable of resisting compulsions for the sake of our own well-being. We're often drawn to the comfort of a sofa and TV, but choose to go to the gym instead. It's a sacrifice of time and energy to improve our physical and mental health over a cozy time on the couch. Resisting desirable technology is possible in a similar way. The masses are hooked on their phones. Most of you watching this video are on your mobile devices, but the eagerness to reduce our screen time is growing, and so too is the resolve. The less we're on these mobile devices, the more at peace we tend to feel. New tech isn't automatically taking off as it did 15 years ago. Apple VR seems to be a colossal failure thus far, and the metaverse is really far from being widely adopted. Maybe it served more as a reminder that we're closing ourselves off from in-person relationships. It made us confront how isolating digital media is and how we ultimately don't want what it offers: loneliness. And there are rumors that Apple will be moving away from a yearly upgrade cycle for their devices because people just aren't buying new iPhones anymore. But resistance is one thing for an adult and it's another for a kid. The pool of screens and social media isn't easy to ignore. It's much easier for an adult to do what's best in their interest in the long term than a child. If it weren't, they probably wouldn't need parents to begin with. It is because of these complicated reasons that I believe there are two distinct paths that Gen Alpha could follow, and whatever path they go down will change the world in completely different ways that we've never seen before. There's a future where Generation Alpha takes on an all-out embrace of current and emerging technologies. They stay on social media, discovering and making new platforms popular. The social media app MindHive, which I'm making up for this future projection, takes our thoughts and feelings and makes them into shareable content. You just capture a snapshot of your mental state and it's assembled into its content by AI algorithms. Presumably, Generation Alpha has widely adopted the newest iteration of Neuralink, which makes this possible. MindHive even shares recreations of your dreams automatically if you don't turn it off in the settings. Technology is now dissolving the barrier between our inner and outer worlds. The next frontier of privacy is captured. Gen Alpha stops caring about privacy altogether. They don't see value in keeping the inner world a secret. They give it all up to be evaluated by their online peers. Those who face rejection for their inner thoughts manage to find groups of like-minded thinkers, and these groups embrace the ideas they might have censored in their own minds previously. The ideas might be helpful, dangerous, or benign, but regardless, there is an echo chamber to support them. Anxiety and depression grows, but the apps respond. Meditation becomes embedded in streams, asking users to stop for 10 minutes. Some move on to the next app, but others take it seriously. The algorithms better manage distressing content, privileging a balance of media that triggers negative emotions and ones that boost esteem. The platforms do just enough to keep people from breaking and leaving. Gen Alpha is kept in a functional state of mental wellness where they're almost entirely at the mercy of an algorithm for their happiness. Beyond the app, Gen Alpha turns AI into an intimate tool. It's how they interact with the world, removing an increasingly vast number of steps in the digital space. Only high-level considerations will be necessary. They'll simply think of a command and the AI will take care of the rest. If they want to travel somewhere, they'll only have to tell the AI where they want to go. They'll lose or never learn many skills, and with them a certain level of critical thinking and idea exploration. While this may seem scary, it may compare to how cars went from manual to automatic. You'll lose a level of control, but you have a more leisurely drive. What we consider creative work will probably shrink considerably. Any human-based creative output will be niche in the same way a handcrafted item is now. You may think we'll always value the human touch, but the average person probably won't care. Even now, many internet users don't seem to notice or be concerned that something is AI generated. Movie studios will find more ways to use generative AI until executives are the only ones left in the building. The 2023 writer and actor strikes were primarily focused on preventing AI from ingesting their scripts and impersonating existing actors. Eventually, AI won't have to rely on famous actors and good writers. They'll just create their own from scratch. Also, Gen Alpha won't be watching movies. They'll retreat from media that's not connected to a social platform. Ironically, Gen Alpha will mostly have physical access to work. They'll try to embrace the trades because they'll have to earn a wage. The value of this labor will go down, and in general, they won't earn as much money. Unemployment will be much higher as there won't be enough of these types of jobs. Their society will be poor, but they'll ultimately be able to escape into their digital lives. They'll still have mobile screens. Gen Alpha will have less and less patience for each other in person. Interacting in real life will be overwhelming for some and too boring for others. It'll be very common for Generation Alpha to use their screen for the majority of face-to-face meetings. Their identities will be wrapped up in their online personas. They won't bother to express themselves as much physically. Those will be more about utility and less will be consumed. More of society will become gamified and connected to their digital experience. Their secondary education will be overhauled to be presented in digital formats that keep students stimulated. Professors will become secondary to the app-based experience that supports learning. Gen Alpha won't take written exams. They will, however, have to prompt an AI with higher precision to demonstrate what they've learned. And while some will continue to read books, others won't read outside of information presented in apps and games. The future that Gen Alpha may adopt will seem scary for those who can remember a home phone in the kitchen. But it'll all seem like a continuum for Alpha. It may not be a harmonious existence, but it won't be a living nightmare either. There is, however, another possible future where the mental health problems associated with social media become too overwhelming. They won't just suggest intervention, but demand it. Generation Alpha forces themselves off of social media and a lot of the internet in general. Generation Alpha will be very aware of the way algorithms shape and create what they see online. In this future, AI makes being online feel uninteresting. When content is generated mainly by non-humans, it loses its appeal. What drew people online into social media to begin with is essentially gone. They came for social connection and the fear of being left out, but when there's no humans, it's the internet without a connection. Social media without the social, the internet for leisure, is effectively dead. Now sure, AI is convincingly able to simulate a conversation. If we allow ourselves to engage with chatbots, they can even give us some of the same feelings we derive from our communications with friends. But when we step back momentarily, we know that we're just talking to a machine. We're missing out on real conversations with real humans. As social animals, we're compelled to communicate with others. The facade of other people doesn't check off enough boxes. It just superficially soothes a part of that social need. In this future, Gen Alpha yearns for privacy. The internet is fake and full of scams. It's filled with AI-generated content for companies whose sole purpose is to make money off of them. Or it's scammers trying to steal in increasingly sophisticated ways. With AI taking most white-collar work, scamming will become more popular. A great section of the population is poor, looking for any way to make more money. Gen Alpha's digital selves are avatars that don't offer much factual information. They don't bother to post, they seek quiet, and use the internet for utility, not as a way to kill time. Gen Alpha effectively destroys the internet as we know it today. It's no longer a form of entertainment or space that runs on advertising. The decrease in human users and increase in bot traffic destroyed its usefulness for marketers. Gen Alpha still uses the internet to make purchases. Some advertising on e-commerce websites exist, but that's about it. In this future, Generation Alpha will still be poor, but they've freed themselves from the chains of social media and screens that bind them. They're reading books, being social, and putting more effort into solving society's ills. They'll try to find a better future for themselves and their kids. As adults, they'll remember their millennial parents' concern about technology, but feel the strength of will to act on them. They see the follies of their parents' resignation to tech. A lot of their world is still digitized, but they seek out in-person experiences that are so alien to their daily lives that it becomes novel. Such a movement wouldn't be without precedent. In the early 1800s, an English group called the Luddites rebelled against industrialization practices by destroying machinery. They were concerned about recent job losses and the wages made by the workers who operated the machines. Too much money was going to the factory owner and not the workers. We often refer to someone who is anti-technology as a Luddite, but the original Luddites didn't hate technology, they just rejected the impact it was having on workers. Luddites were rejecting the way it shaped their lives. Obviously, there's a big difference between English workers breaking machines and an entire generation putting down their phones. Generation Alpha has a big incentive, however, to change course. They'll see the negative impact AI and social media have on their lives while the internet loses its grip on them. The first path I described is an extreme version of a tech utopia slowly unraveling over time. The second is an expansion of our more recent rejection of this vision of the future. It's also a natural consequence of the impact of a dead internet. I don't think either path is obvious, and the path of rejection seems better for the mental well-being, but the former will still be a life worth living. Maybe it'll just be different. Familiar and alien, but Generation Alpha will know how to navigate it. They were born with the tools that are shaping them, not interrupted in the middle of their youth. And who knows, maybe our disdain for the digital future is just us looking too fondly back in the rearview mirror. We can't predict precisely how a generation will turn out, and anyone telling you otherwise is probably in marketing. I put together these two paths based on current trends pointing in different directions. Many things could change before Gen Alpha becomes the dominant generation in society. The world has been disrupted before, and it'll be disrupted again. Climate change, fascists, and killer robots could completely undermine everything about the future I just described, Now you might be scoffing that I mentioned killer robots, but imagine consumer drone technology advancing with AI and weaponry. Just for a moment. An AI-driven internet may also influence society in very dark ways. Fascists may rise because of rigorous AI programs designed to micro-influence people until they're cheering on the end of democracy. Society might also be steered by AI-generated garbage simply designed to produce revenue from misleading clickbait. There's a whole hate farm based in Cairo, for example, that exists to make money off of anti-Justin Trudeau sentiments. He's the Prime Minister of Canada, in case you didn't know. The creators of the content are indifferent to the cause their channel promotes. If AI and other forms of automation completely erase the middle class, then a digital life may not even be affordable for most. This too would cut Generation Alpha off from the stranglehold social media threatens to have on them. However the future unfolds, it's important not to judge a generation by some annoying traits. We all play an enormous role in determining how future generations turn out. Gen Alpha is born with the technology designed, distributed, and embraced by our cohort and those who came before us. We also have a tendency to look back on the way things used to be and be pined for those old values. Our world is potentially becoming less private and more individualistic, and that causes older generations anguish and longing. Marshall McLuhan would say that we're looking back fondly at what we see in the rearview mirror. In the 1960s, McLuhan suggested that people were prone to living in Bonanza land. By obsessing over the show Bonanza and its Wild West setting, people were looking back, longing in the rearview mirror at values that were gone. Whether Alpha becomes a generation that is inseparable from their digital lives or one that revolts against them is beyond our control. Our influence is only so significant, up against the forces of technology and the complexity of society. This is a nice reminder to focus on what is in our control. As the Stoics would suggest, we can only govern our reaction to how the universe unfolds. We don't need to look back through the rearview mirror in misery, wishing for a past that will not return. With an open mind, we can engage with the new tools with a reasonable amount of guardedness. It's not to suggest that new technology doesn't pose actual harm. Digital media can negatively impact your relationships, your concentration, and many other things you love. Social media and gamification can lead to unhealthy addictions. The many forms of digital media can wreak havoc on your well-being, and every generation needs to take that seriously. But we can thoughtfully navigate these potential harms. There's still happiness to be found in a brave new world, and Generation Alpha is capable of finding it.
The year is 1665, and Isaac Newton is looking out his window at an apple tree standing tall in his orchard in Lincolnshire, England. All of a sudden, a ripe and lonely apple falls from the tree and makes its way to the ground. While most people would consider this a mundane event, Newton followed its trajectory with great interest. What young Isaac didn't know at the time was that this apple would become the most famous piece of fruit in human history, as its natural attraction to the ground would spark a moment of genius, leading him to create the laws of motion that revolutionized modern physics. Newton wasn't conducting an experiment when he discovered the laws of gravity. He wasn't overloading his brain with information trying to figure it out. He was simply looking aimlessly outside his window. He was bored. But that was in the 17th century. Times have changed a lot since then. These days, we hardly ever allow ourselves to just stare out a window or sit in our backyards doing nothing but staring at the sky. We never pause for a moment and just let our minds wander into deep, unexplored territories. Turns out that diving deep into our own thoughts is something that we don't really like to do. We find it boring and will do anything to alleviate boredom, even if it means subjecting ourselves to self-inflicted electric shocks. This, sadly, is not an exaggeration. In a study conducted at the University of Virginia, a social psychologist named Timothy Wilson recruited hundreds of student volunteers to take part in what he called thinking periods. Individuals were placed in small rooms with blank walls and no personal belongings. They were asked to entertain themselves with nothing but their thoughts for just 6 to 15 minutes. When asked to rate their experience afterwards, about 50% of the volunteers did not like being alone with their thoughts, citing it was boring. Then, researchers left the volunteers in the room for another 15 minutes. This time, though, they introduced a button that participants could press to shock themselves if they wanted to. Around 67% of men and 25% of women chose to voluntarily inflict pain on themselves rather than just sit and do nothing. This research suggests that, sadly, a lot of us would rather experience physical pain than sit in our own thoughts. When left with nothing else to do, most of us immediately grab our phones, switching from one app to the other, as the algorithms of the internet feed us with the exact content that'll keep us from being bored. What we fail to realize is that for these algorithms to understand what makes us tick, they take so much of our information. Companies then sell that information, things like your name, phone number, and home address, to data brokers who sell them to other companies. What's worse is that sometimes these data brokers are involved in data breaches, where all the information they have about you is stolen by nefarious actors. A few months ago, my friend got this message from Google telling him that some of his passwords were found in a data breach from a company that he'd never heard of before. And right after, he started getting personalized email ads from scam companies. This is how scammers are able to figure out your personal information. It's completely risk-free for 30 days, so I encourage every one of you to at least give it a try, and if you're not happy, you get a full refund. But I can assure you, when you see just how many data brokers have your information, you'd definitely want to keep your subscription. Back to our story. In the spring and summer of 1665, an outbreak of bubonic plague spread through London, and by July, had claimed more than 17,000 lives. Almost at once, people throughout the city began fleeing to the countryside, isolating themselves in fear for their lives. Among those who fled was none other than Sir Isaac Newton. Of course, at that time, Newton had not yet been knighted. In fact, he had not yet even witnessed the famous apple falling. Interestingly though, his 2 years spent in isolation, away from the bells, whistles, and distractions of the city, was the time when Newton's genius came to life, and he was able to invent calculus, create the science of motion, and develop a framework for gravity. These 2 years spent in quarantine were Newton's own 15 minutes isolated in a room with nothing to do. Newton, however, didn't seek external stimuli to prevent his mind from wandering. Instead, he welcomed the boredom that often comes with deep thinking, and stared out the window, which has, without a doubt, paid dividends for all of humanity. During this isolation in the countryside, Newton also invented calculus. Throughout his life, he also made major discoveries in optics, proposing that white light is actually a combination of light from all of the color spectrum. Most famously, following his Apple incident, he developed the 3 laws of motion. In all fairness, attributing Newton's greatest accomplishments to him being quarantined in the countryside is a bit misleading. The truth is, the incident of the apple falling wasn't an isolated moment of genius. Newton's various contributions to science were the product of years of hard work and dedication, tediously working towards these moments of revelation. However, it is still helpful to recognize the importance of solitude and boredom in creating that particular eureka moment. According to psychologist Dr. Sandy Mann of the University of Central Lancashire, once we start daydreaming and allow our brains to wander like Newton did when he looked out the window, we start thinking beyond the conscious and into the subconscious, which allows for all sorts of connections to take place. This is called the default mode. When you're bored or performing mundane tasks like doing the dishes or folding the laundry, your body may be on autopilot, but your brain is actually pretty busy. When in the default mode, your mind gets the chance to connect to different ideas, try and solve some of your most pressing problems, and even create personal narratives or set goals. This is why programmers often tell you that they figured out their problem with their code just as they were jumping into bed, ready to get some shut-eye, or why you feel like your best ideas come when you jump in the shower. The problem is that today, those are the very rare moments that we allow ourselves to be bored. Every other time, we almost always choose the electric shock method. Living in a society where we have the entire world of entertainment on our fingertips has led to our immediate dissatisfaction with even seconds of boredom. The more we fill our world with fast-moving, high-intensity stimulation, the more we get used to it, and the less of a tolerance we have for boredom. On average, Americans reach for their phones 344 times a day. That's once every 4 minutes. From quick email checks to diving down the rabbit hole of reels and memes, Americans spend an average of 2 hours and 54 minutes on their phone each day, with some people clocking up to 10 hours a day on their phones. Without a doubt, technology has definitely made the world a better place, but this unhealthy, dependent relationship we have with our phones is robbing us of our most creative selves. German psychologist Theodor Lipps proposed one of the first definitions of boredom in 1903, saying, "Boredom is a feeling of displeasure arising out of conflict between a need for intense mental activity and lack of incitement to it, or inability to be incited." In other words, it's an underwhelming state where none of the options available to us seem appealing. Instead of letting this feeling run its course, we overstimulate our brain and prevent it from taking advantage of the true power of this downtime. Our first instinct when we experience boredom is to just endlessly scroll through feeds, swishing through social media apps, even when we're walking from one room to the next or waiting for the cashier to bag our groceries. We've become conditioned to constantly seek out novelty and deliver a hit of dopamine to our brain. Sadly, once that sense of novelty fades, it leaves behind a stronger feeling of boredom, which we then try to get rid of with even more stimulation. It's a vicious cycle that keeps our brain occupied. Mindless entertainment designed to capture our attention for the longest time possible. Studies have shown that, when given tasks that require minimum mental capacity, participants often contemplated their future and their plans for it. On the other hand, if your brain is constantly consumed by stimuli, it'll rarely have the time to think of the bigger picture and is less likely to set goals for the future or to be more creative. A 2017 study from Georgia Institute of Technology measured the brain patterns of more than 100 people. Participants were asked to focus on a stationary point while they lay in a MRI machine. The goal was to figure out which areas of the brain worked together during an awake but resting state. The team compared the data with questionnaires that the participants filled out about how much their minds wandered in daily life. It turns out participants who had reported more frequent daydreaming scored higher on intellectual and creative ability and had more efficient brain systems recorded on the MRI. These findings are supported by a lot of artists when discussing their creative process. In his book Creative Quest, music producer and drummer for The Roots, Questlove, wrote about his battle against the many distractions available to us in today's world. On the face of it, it doesn't make any sense. Boredom seems like the least creative feeling, but it's actually a way of clearing space for a new idea to spring back up. Similarly, J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series, formulated all the ideas for her book in a 4-hour train ride from Manchester to London. If she had an iPad and binge-watched her favorite Netflix show instead, she probably wouldn't have brought Harry in his magical world to life. In his book Daily Rituals, Mason Curry studied the routines of hundreds of other artists, writers, and creatives, and concluded that boredom is a recurring theme that leads to the mind wandering and having a kind of diffused focus which allows for creative production. This diffused state is when the mind enters its default mode and comes up with its best work. Perhaps the best proof of this truth is none other than Albert Einstein himself. Einstein took over where Newton left off and gave us a more advanced definition of gravity with the notion of a curved spacetime. Einstein was known for his extremely vivid imagination and inspired thought experiments that allowed him to define time as the fourth dimension, and to change our understanding of the mechanics of the universe itself. Many people believe that the seeds of his genius were planted during the year he took off from high school in the 1890s, when he simply wandered without purpose and contemplated the world, free from any external pressures. Throughout his life, Einstein would take regular walks to clear his mind, and in a letter he wrote to his friends while sailing in 1932, he said, "A cruise in the sea is an excellent opportunity for maximum calm and reflection on ideas from a different perspective." It was clear that he knew the importance of sitting still and letting the mind wander. Our history is full of many great thinkers who have been conscious enough to take advantage of their downtime and utilize it in the name of creative production. Psychologists today encourage parents to allow their children to be bored instead of occupying all their time watching YouTube on their tablets. The idea is to give the young minds the time and space needed to discover, create, and find their own genius. Teaching people, especially kids, how to use technology to improve their lives, while also self-regulating their exposure to it, should be a crucial part of digital literacy. There's a saying used in tech: when the product is free, you are the product. Our attention is being fought for by a magnitude of applications, and at the end of the day, we're left with no time to just sit and contemplate on our own life and experiences. But that shouldn't be the case. Next time you find yourself reaching for your phone when you're bored, remember, you're choosing to voluntarily shock yourself, instead of looking out the window and contemplating on your own metaphorical apple falling from the tree. You'd be surprised what your mind can achieve when you just allow it to wander for a moment. In June 2019, Kirsten Muller-Wahl, a psychiatrist at Hanover Medical School and head of its Tourette's outpatient department, noticed unusual symptoms in her new set of patients. To begin with, all of them were teenagers, and they were suffering from sudden and uncontrollable tics. Even though none of them had any history of the condition, they were all shouting different kinds of obscenities. Muller-Wahl consulted her tight-knit group of global Tourette researchers and found out that her newest patients were not unique. It seemed that a shift in patients and symptoms was happening all over the world, and what was even more surprising was that it was happening at the same time. But what really puzzled Muller-Wahl was that most were repeatedly shouting the same phrase: "You are ugly." As it turned out, this phrase was the key to understanding this strange spike in cases. 4 months before the mysterious global outbreak, a 20-year-old German suffering from Tourette's named Jim Zimmerman launched a YouTube channel and a TikTok page detailing what it's like to live with his condition. He immediately became a social media sensation, gathering more than 2 million subscribers on YouTube and millions of views on TikTok, where he shows his viewers how his condition can force him to blurt obscene words or experience uncontrollable tics and convulsions. Zimmerman had the tendency to blurt out the phrase, "You are ugly," one that he shared with all new style patients suddenly appearing all over the world. After making this connection, researchers found that all the patients who suddenly claimed to have tics were also fans of Zimmerman. When Muller-Wahl confronted her distressed patients and told them that none of them actually had Tourette's, most of them recovered immediately. But despite their recoveries, this case presented researchers with an unprecedented psychological mystery, showing how imagined symptoms can spread purely from TikTok videos. While these teenagers didn't suffer from Zimmerman's condition, something triggered their minds to believe that they did, and all of a sudden, all of them simultaneously and independently developed these TikTok tics. With TikTok becoming one of the most used social media apps today, it's becoming even more important to consider. Could TikTok be causing a mass psychosis?
Masterworks offerings are filed with the SEC. To view all past and current offerings, click on the SEC link in the description.
Mass psychogenic illness, or MPI, also known as mass sociogenic illness, is a real occurrence where a group of people starts feeling real physical symptoms at the same time, even though there's no physical or environmental reason for them to be sick. The dancing plagues of the Middle Ages were probably the most bizarre form of MPI. In July 1518, residents of the city Strasbourg were struck by an uncontrollable urge to dance. It started with one woman stepping into the street and dancing for nearly a week before she was joined by 36 others who also seemed to have the same uncontrollable urge. The town then hired musicians to provide backing music, which only worsened the situation as more people joined in. It wasn't long before the marathon started to take its toll. By August, the dancing plague had 400 people in its clutches, with 100 of them dancing themselves to death. More recent but less dramatic cases include a boarding school in Mexico, where a student developed leg pain and paralysis. Soon after, hundreds of their schoolmates began experiencing the same symptoms. In East Africa, 3 girls who started laughing uncontrollably managed to infect over 100 other students, forcing their school to close down. The triggers for mass psychogenic illnesses cannot be entirely isolated, but they can easily spread among people who share the same anxieties, fears, and sense of community. This is what makes the TikTok tics an even more intriguing study. TikTok rapidly gained popularity during the pandemic as a trendy dance video and crazy challenge app. But since then, it has established itself as the world's most popular app, with nearly 3 times as many users as Twitter. A recent study even found that it has dethroned Google as the most popular domain in 2021, with most of its visitors using the app as a primary search and discovery platform. With over 1 billion active monthly users who spend an average of 95 minutes a day using the app, it has become more important than ever to understand what kind of effects TikTok has on our brains. While the effects of social media on our mental state have been a topic of debate for the past decade, the emergence of TikTok is different. It allows users to watch an unlimited stream of new content, observe trends rise and fall daily, and find something new with each swipe. Because the videos are often extremely short, the user can quickly decide whether to continue watching or move on to something more interesting. This constant stream of information can narrow and exhaust our attention span over time, limit our concentration, and affect our short-term memory. TikTok places a constant focus for content to be delivered in 60 seconds or less, making anything longer feel like it's a waste of our time. Some users have reported that they don't even have the patience to watch 10-minute videos on YouTube anymore, even when the topic interests them. This reduction in our attention spans can come from a variety of risk factors, such as poor academic performance, communication struggles, social isolation, relationship difficulties, stress, and anxiety. A recent study conducted by Curtin University in Australia has shown that the heavy use of social media can lead to problematic mental health consequences, especially for people with lower attention spans, which brings us back to the TikTok tics. This curious Tourette's case was the first form of social media-induced psychogenic illness. In addition to the teenagers in Germany, about 50 patients across the globe presented the same symptoms, which demonstrates the domino effect of our social media landscape. Constant exposure can lead to low attention spans in those that never had the issue before, which can lead to psychological illnesses, which can, in turn, spread imagined conditions around the world, in a way that we never even dreamt of before the age of the internet. According to TikTok, videos tagged with the hashtag Tourette's have been viewed more than 5 billion times. The unexpected appeal of these videos among teenagers can be attributed to a need to stand out or be different. But the truth is, videos like these also provide a sense of community, acceptance, sympathy, and validation, which all seem to be present in patients suffering from MPI. Even though Zimmerman's intentions were to show his followers what it's like living with Tourette's, it also validated violating social conventions and gave proof to young, impressionable viewers that the more disruptive you are, the more viral you'll go. This is the basic concept behind TikTok. The whole idea is to promote videos that can go viral in an instant and push young content creators to produce similar content. That's why the first thing you see when you open the app is the For You page, where short videos that are carefully selected to grab your attention are displayed. It's why the video's on autoplay and shown in an endless scroll, and there's no signalization of progress or duration of the experience. All these features are intentionally designed to grab and keep the attention of young users for as long as possible, and urge them to create similar content if they want to get that attention for themselves. In a recent interview, comedian Andrew Schulz talked about how TikTok's algorithm promotes useless content in the West, but shows entirely different content centered around innovation, architecture, and science in China. Like Schulz, many argue that TikTok is intentionally making people dumb by manipulating user behavior and pushing mindless content on its impressionable young viewers. To that point, TikTok trends have included things like the blackout challenge, where children were tasked with holding their breath until they fainted, the penny challenge, encouraging kids to push pennies behind partially plugged phone chargers, which could have dangerous results, and the tooth file challenge, where young users were causing permanent damage to their teeth just for some of that desired attention. The more these videos went viral, the more content creators saw it as an opportunity to gain traction on the platform. This in itself feeds the vicious cycle of harmful content that leads to illnesses similar to the TikTok tics and other mental disorders. Today, TikTok is being looked at in a number of US states to determine its influence on its young users' mental health. According to Dr. David Barnhart, clinical mental health counselor at Behavioral Sciences of Alabama, all social media platforms impact how a person views themselves, but because of TikTok's rapid-fire influx of content, users are exposed to dozens of videos within minutes, which makes the effect much more devastating than other platforms. Users can easily become addicted to the app and may seek constant stimulation as a result. This constant stimulation increases stress and anxiety levels, especially with numerous videos that fuel body dissatisfaction, appearance-related anxiety, and much more. Mental health professionals have reported seeing a number of younger patients who spend considerable time on TikTok, claiming to have severe mental health conditions such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And the main issue with such claims is that more exposure to targeted content can influence teenagers to misdiagnose themselves with a mental illness without consulting a professional, only because they can relate to some of the symptoms of a TikTok influencer they follow. Just like the TikTok tics case, young adults who self-diagnose can also do so from a desire to feel like they're part of a community, or to rebel against social constructs, and in the process, they can genuinely believe that they suffer from a specific illness, even when they don't. The flip side to all of this is that there are several positives that can come from highlighting mental health issues online. The sense of community, which can be harmful in some cases, can also be helpful in normalizing these conditions and sending the message that people aren't alone. Young people suffering from their own issues can come together and support each other with helpful tips on how to deal with depression, anxiety, and other hurdles in their daily life. Videos discussing mental health get millions of views on TikTok every day and draw people to symptoms that some people may not have realized were an issue. This can spur people into action and encourage them to seek help. As with all things, there are positives and negatives, which is why experts don't believe that deleting TikTok is the answer. Instead, regulating and monitoring the time spent on the app is key. Otherwise, the social media-fueled mental health crisis is only going to get worse. The age of the internet has definitely brought out a whole new dimension of concerns that we should worry about, but TikTok itself has changed the online world. It's a cultural phenomenon with a superior algorithm that is unmatched by its social media rivals. It's built to ruthlessly and aggressively collect your data, and constantly feed you content that's for you. Content that could change the direction of your life, warp your perceptions of the world around you, and even cause mass psychogenic illnesses worldwide. MPIs have existed for hundreds of years, and yet a lot of the reasons why they happen remain a mystery. But what we can learn from the TikTok ticks case is that we're now entering a new era of social media-induced sociogenic psychosis, and apps like TikTok have more control and power over our youth than we thought. The best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior, and based on what we already know, we've most likely not seen the last of social media-induced psychological illnesses. For now, at least you had the patience to watch this entire video. Thanks for not swiping to check out the latest escalator dance clips or watch a guy deep cleaning a horse's hoof. As of 2019, 96% of deepfakes on the internet were sexual in nature, and virtually all of those were of non-consenting women. With the release of AI tools like DALL-E and Midjourney, making these deepfakes has become easier than ever before, and the repercussions for the women involved are much more devastating. Recently, a teacher in a small town in the United States was fired after her likeness appeared in an adult video. Parents of the students found the video and made it clear they didn't want this woman teaching their kids. She was immediately dismissed from her position. But this woman never actually filmed an explicit video. Generative AI created a likeness of her and deepfaked it onto the body of an adult film actress. She pleaded her innocence, but the parents of the students couldn't wrap their heads around how a video like this could be faked. They refused to believe her. And honestly, it's hard to blame them. We've all seen just how good generative AI can be. This incident, and many others just like it, prove how dangerous AI adult content is, and if left unchecked, it could be so much worse. The truth is, the technology itself isn't the problem, it's the way people are using it and the lack of regulation surrounding its use. At first glance, AI pornography might seem harmless. If we can generate other forms of content without human actors, why not this one? Surely it may reduce work in the field, but it could also curb more problematic issues in the industry. If the AI was used to create artificial people, it wouldn't be so bad, but the problem is that the generative AI has been mainly used with deepfakes to convince viewers that the person they're watching is a specific, real person, someone who never consented to be in the video. Speaking of consent, by convincingly portraying women in suggestive situations, the perpetrators commit sexual acts or behaviors without the victim's permission, and that, by definition, is sexual assault. But does using generative AI to produce these videos cause any actual harm beyond being defined as assault? For the victims involved, there are numerous consequences to being portrayed in these videos.
This is what it looks like to see yourself naked against your will being spread all over the internet.
QTC Cinderella is a Twitch streamer who built a massive following for her gaming, baking, and lifestyle content. She also created the Streamer Awards that honor her fellow content creators, one of whom was Brandon Ewing, aka Atrioc. In January of 2023, Atrioc was live streaming when his viewers saw a tab open on his browser for a deepfake website. After getting screenshotted and posted on Reddit, users found that the site address featured deepfakes videos of streamers like QTC Cinderella doing explicit sexual acts. Cinderella began getting harassed by these images and videos, and after seeing them she said, "The amount of body dysmorphia I've experienced seeing those photos has ruined me. It's not as simple as just being violated, it's so much more than that." For months afterwards, QTC Cinderella was constantly harassed with these reminders of these images and videos. Some horrible people sent the photos to her 17-year-old cousin. And this isn't a one-off case. Perpetrators of deepfakes are known to send these videos to family members of the victims, especially if they don't like what the victim is doing publicly. The founder of Not Your Porn, a group dedicated to removing non-consensual porn from the internet, was targeted by internet trolls using AI-generated videos depicting her in explicit acts. Then somebody sent these videos to her family members. Just imagine how terrible that must feel for her and her relatives. The sad truth is that even when a victim can discredit the videos, the harm might already be done. A deepfake can hurt someone's career at a pivotal moment. Cinderella was able to get back on her feet and retain her following, but the school teacher, who lost her livelihood, wasn't so lucky. Imagine someone running for office and leading in the polls only to be targeted with a deepfake video 24 hours before election night. Imagine how much damage could be done before their team could prove that the video was doctored. Unfortunately, there's very little legislation on deepfakes, and so far only 3 states in the US have passed laws to address them directly. Even with these laws, the technology makes it difficult to track down the people who create them. Also, because most of them post on their personal websites rather than social media, there's no regulations or content moderation limits on what they can share.
Since tracking and prosecuting the individuals who make this kind of content is so challenging, the onus should be on the companies that make these tools to prevent them from being used for evil. And in fairness, some of them are trying. Platforms like Dolly and Midjourney have taken steps to prevent people from creating the likeness of a living person. Reddit is also working to improve its AI detection system and has already made considerable strides in prohibiting this content on its platform. These efforts are important, but I'm not sure they'll completely eliminate the threat of deepfakes. More generative AI tools are coming on the scene and will require new moderation efforts, and eventually some of these platforms won't care, especially if that gives them an edge over well-established platforms. And then there's the sheer influx of uploaded content. In 2022, Pornhub received over 2 million video uploads to its site. That number will likely increase with new AI tools that can generate content without needing a physical camera. How can any moderation system keep up with that insane volume? The worst thing about these deepfakes is that the victims can't just log off of the internet either. Almost all of our livelihoods depend on the internet, so logging off would be an enormous disadvantage in their careers and personal life. And expecting anyone to leave the internet to protect themselves isn't a reasonable ask. The onus isn't on the victim to change, it's on the platforms and the government to create tools that prevent these things from happening so easily. If all the women who are being harassed went offline, the trolls would win, and this tactic of theirs would be incredibly successful. They could effectively silence critics and whoever they felt like attacking. There's another problem with generative AI tools producing so much adult content. It introduces strong biases to the algorithms and how women should be presented. Many women have reported that they're often over-sexualized when they try to create an image of themselves using AI tools. These biases are introduced by the source of the AI's training data, the internet. Although nudes and explicit images have been filtered out for some generative AI platforms, these biases still persist. These platforms have to do more than just let the open internet train their AI if they want to prevent the overt sexualization of women to be their normal output. Deepfakes may be making headlines now, but the truth is they've been around in spirit for a very long time. Before generative AI, people used tools like Photoshop and video editing software to superimpose celebrities' heads on the bodies of adult film actors. Broadly, these doctored videos weren't compelling, but the things are now very different with AI. We're careening dangerously close to a point where we can no longer discern the real from the fake. French postmodern philosopher Baudrillard warned of a moment when we can no longer distinguish between reality and a simulation. Humans use technology to navigate a complex reality. We invented maps to guide us through an intricate mass of land. Eventually, we created mass media to understand the world around us and help simplify its complexity. But there will be a point where we lose track of reality, a point when we're spending more time looking at a simulation of the world on our phone than we will be participating in the real world around us, and we're almost there now. With generative AI, our connection to reality is even further disconnected. Because technology can convincingly replicate reality on our devices, we're less inclined to go outside and see what's real for ourselves. This inability of human consciousness is to distinguish what is real and what is simulation is what Baudrillard called hyperreality, a state that leaves us vulnerable to malicious manipulation, from things like deepfakes to people getting fired to propaganda leading to the loss of millions of lives. You might remember that a couple of years ago there were numerous PSAs, often from celebrities, warning us to keep an eye out for deepfakes. They were annoying, but ultimately, they succeeded in making the public hyper-aware of fake videos. But not so much with the deepfake adult content. Maybe it's because the PSAs about deepfakes didn't mention pornography, they addressed fake speeches by presidents and famous people instead. Or maybe it's because those who consume this content don't care whether it's real or fake. They're okay with the illusion. One thing is true though, if the general public was trained to recognize deepfake pornography, the potential for harm would be limited. By being more critical as information consumers and reporting these harmful videos when we see them, we might be able to curb the effects of this dangerous new medium. It's not like we're strangers to being critical of what we see and read online. When Wikipedia was first introduced, the idea that it could be a legitimate source of information was laughable. It was mocked on sitcoms and late-night television. It symbolized the absurdity of believing what you read on the internet. That perception changed with time, deservedly so for Wikipedia, but we had a healthy skepticism towards user-generated internet platforms for a while. The question is, can we be critical and discerning towards deepfakes while acknowledging that some content is real? Will we lose track of what's simulation and what's reality and just distrust whatever we see online? Or worse, will manipulators succeed in making deepfake-inflicted suffering an everyday occurrence, and we end up accepting that as the cost of existing online? And is there any hope of regulation stopping the constant assault of generative AI on our well-being? One thing's become clear since ChatGPT and Dolly started making headlines last year, and it's that AI will inevitably replace a lot of what humans currently do. It can already convincingly replicate human communication and human design, and our inability to distinguish between human output and AI output has created a laundry list of problems that will be challenging to address. Already, businesses are using ChatGPT's writing capabilities in their marketing and sales departments. It's even possible that we'll be watching AI-written TV shows soon. For writers, that's your dream job and your day job both vanishing overnight. And then there will be all the opportunities for deception using AI, like imagine what phishing scams there'll be in a year when scammers can easily fabricate videos and audio of anyone you know. People with ill intent can create content to cause others real harm, and right now that's AI-generated adult videos inflicting pain against women. If we're unable to tell what's real and what's an AI-generated fake, humanity has a tough road ahead, and I'm not sure any of us are ready for it.
If I asked you the question, what is man's greatest invention? What would your answer be? There's a lot of options. Would it be fire? Because it gives us warmth, protection, and the ability to cook our meals. Or perhaps you would pick the wheel, because it's the driving force behind the beginnings of trade, commerce, and travel. While both of these are excellent choices, most of the time when we think about the greatest inventions of mankind, we tend to forget one of the most important ones of all: money. But unlike man's other great inventions, money is immaterial. Maybe that's why we don't often think of it in the same breath as some of the other great inventions. Things like fire and the wheel are tangible, but not money. Money is merely an idea, an illusion whose value is non-existent, only determined by the importance we place on it. Or at least money as we know it today. However, the fact that money is an illusion does not in any way undermine its importance. Before we created money, we were forced to trade goods and services directly in what we refer to as the barter system, people exchanging goods and services for other goods and services in return. Because there was no arbitrary value placed on these items, every single trade was determined by what each party was willing to give up for something that they wanted. It was kind of like a game. If I wanted some of your vegetables for dinner, but I only reared cattle, I would have to give you one of my animals in exchange for a bag of vegetables. If I wanted shoes to wear, but I only made tents, I would have had to give you an entire tent in exchange for a pair of shoes. And immediately you can already see one of the major problems with this system of trade. It's the asymmetry. As a tent maker, there's no way I wouldn't feel cheated having to exchange an entire living space for simple footwear. Because there was no standardized medium of exchange, it was very difficult to get two people who needed things from each other to come to an agreement. Having to wait until a double coincidence of once where two people need the exact opposite thing at the same time was also very difficult and inefficient. And that wasn't all. You see, our money is not only a medium of exchange, it's also considered a store of value. And before the invention of money, some people could never store their wealth for no fault of their own. Think about the farmer who sells tomatoes and the man who makes tents. The man who makes tents can create an entire village of real estate and barter it out with anyone who needs a place to rest their head all year long, and he would probably cash out on that. But the farmer who sells tomatoes can only barter when tomatoes are in season. And because tomatoes are perishable goods, he cannot keep them for a long period of time. So, although he would be putting in the same effort into his business as the tent maker, there's absolutely no way for him to remain wealthy all year long. There's also the problem of having something that only very few people want. Nowadays, when starting a business, you're often told to find a niche, a small group of people who are very interested in what you have to offer. Before money was a thing, that advice would have you left with nothing worth bartering. The people who had the most were those who owned things that everyone wanted. Things like weapons, animal skin, and salt. But then since everyone knew that everyone wanted these things, they started buying them even if they didn't need them at the time, just so they could trade with them later. And so commodity money became a thing. People would exchange goods and services for the most common items, like salt or weapons, and just use that to trade for what they want from someone else. From salt and weapons to tiny collectibles like shells and beads, humanity had found a better way to trade and transact. Instead of exchanging goods and services for goods and services you may not need at the time, you can exchange your goods and services for arbitrary objects to act as placeholders of value, an IOU, or IOU. After that, you can use these placeholders to get goods and services you actually want from someone else. The idea was brilliant, so brilliant that the entire world slowly moved away from the barter system to the money trading system. But there was still one problem with this medium of exchange. You see, for money to be worth anything, it needs to be scarce. The more available something is, the lesser its implied value. That's basic economics. If everyone can get their hands on something, it can't be worth that much, right? So things like sand or shells that you could easily pick up on any beach weren't really a good measure of value. As a result, around the year 770 BC, the first metal coins were created in China. As a sort of homage, the Chinese made miniature versions of the tools that were once regarded as currency. They made the coins circular so that it was easy to reach into your pocket and take them out without hurting your fingers. Then they cast the coins in bronze. This was it. Money was finally worth something. You couldn't just go to a beach somewhere and pick up bronze. It was scarce. It had value. At this time, money wasn't yet an illusion. The value of a coin was determined by the value of the metal the coin was made out of. If you had a coin that was made from 1 gram of gold, it was worth 1 gram of gold. You could easily measure it and see for yourself that it is, in fact, 1 gram of gold. However, kings and rulers quickly discovered the power of money. They realized that the more of these tiny precious metals you had, the more power you could control. And so in 600 BC, Alyattes, king of Lydia, created the first official money mint. He created the coins using a mix of silver and gold, and stamped an image on the coin to act as denominations. Now people could easily tell the value of the piece of metal they were holding simply by looking at the picture on its face. But the kings of the world wanted more money, and precious metals were too expensive. To produce more money, they started slimming down the coins, then mixing the more expensive metals with cheaper metals. Soon, all the coins in circulation were worth less than what the image on their face said they were worth, and so the illusion of money was born. The value of the coin was no longer determined by the value of the metal. The value of the coin was now simply what the rulers in the bank said it was. So 1 British pound sterling represented 1 pound of sterling silver. However, when international trade became a thing, people realized that metal coins were too heavy to lug around. And so kings around the world started issuing IOU certificates for long-distance trading. Because these pieces of paper were stamped by the king, people trusted its value and believed that they could use it to get back whatever it was worth in coins. And that was true for the time being. As more of these IOU certificates flooded the market, people needed coins less and less. Until finally, the paper was worth what we believed it was worth, even if we no longer exchanged it for physical pieces of gold and silver. From ancient kings to modern-day governments and central banks, money has remained an illusion, a mere representation whose value is determined by the importance people place on it. The most valuable banknote in circulation today is the 10,000 Singapore dollars note. Although not being produced anymore, this single piece of paper worth $7,345 at the moment is still regarded as a legal tender, so you can still use it to buy things. Valuable things like houses, cars, and even metals like gold. The banknote itself costs less than 20 cents to produce, but the illusion of the fiat currency system means it's as valuable as 120 grams of gold. Fiat is the fancy word we use to describe the modern-day illusion. It's a Latin word that translates to "let it be done." It's a decree by the government that, in the case of money, determines what its value is and enforces it as legal tender. The illusion of money is one that we never really think about, but just like the kings of old, the governments of today understand the power of money and, as always, want more of it. They know that the more of these pieces of paper you have, the more power you have. So what do? Well, they can simply create more pieces of paper out of thin air. Yes. If, for example, the United States government wanted $340 million for, I don't know, maybe another F-22 jet, they can simply print the money to do so. But there's one problem with this: inflation. The thing about money is that primarily, it needs to be a means of exchange to be considered valuable. So the amount of money in circulation needs to reflect the output of the goods and services that are being produced. When more money is printed than there are goods and services, all other things being equal, the prices of these goods and services increase, and the value of the money itself drops. This is why many economists, and even everyday people like you and me, are worried about the current global reserve currency, the United States dollar. 2020 was a terrible year for the entire world. In the wake of the pandemic, most economies had to be shut down. The goods and services available and the general output of the economy was reduced to mere trickles, and the world kind of came to a halt for a while. Because there wasn't as much money flowing around, to keep the economy from going under and basically our world falling apart, the US government started printing money at a rate faster than has ever been printed before in its entire existence. Right now, 40% of the US dollars in existence today were printed in the last 18 months alone. That's outrageous. And because the output of the country hasn't really increased by that much, eventually, the prices of the goods and services might start to skyrocket. You can see this taking place in the price of commodities, such as lumber, which had as much as tripled in price from just a year ago. If you haven't noticed, some of the prices of the things at your favorite restaurants are now slightly higher than they were last year. It's an ever so small increase. Maybe the guac at Chipotle is 20 cents higher, but it's happening right there under your nose. On the surface, it seems like a good thing that governments decided to send out stimulus and unemployment checks to their citizens. But the reality is, it's a double-edged sword. Of course, it helps those most in need, and that's a good thing. We're at the point where, because of inflation and a slowed economy, people really aren't able to get the right jobs at the right times. Sometimes it's not even because they don't want them, but because it's simply worse than the alternative. For example, in the United States at least, if you're a waiter or a waitress, you aren't required by law to be paid even minimum wage. Some are literally paid $2 to $3 an hour, with the rest of their income coming from tips. But with a lot of restrictions and rules in place around the country, and not as many people going out, there's less customers. Less customers with less money means less tips. If your employees aren't making enough money, they're gonna quit. Simple as that. If your business doesn't have employees to help you run it, you're going to go under. It's a domino effect. But what can you even do? When you can earn more money from unemployment and stimulus checks than you would from being employed, why even look for a job in the first place? You see, the Federal Reserve of the United States is a very sneaky way for the government to essentially create money out of thin air and pump it into the economy without people thinking too much about it. Before 2020, the United States was $29 trillion in debt. It's an unbelievable and inconceivable amount of money to even begin with. This debt is obtained in the form of bonds and treasury notes, which are basically just pieces of paper that say the government will pay you so-and-so amount plus interest. Right now, a 10-year US Treasury bond will return you about 1.23% on your investment at expiry. So if you put in $1,000 today, you'll have made $12.30 by 2031. That sounds terrible already, but to add icing onto the cake, it doesn't even keep up with inflation, which is targeted to stay around 2% a year. It's a lot higher than that, but that's for another time. By investing in government notes of your own country, which issues the currency you use every single day, you actually lose buying power over a decade. It is weakened by the day. But regardless, banks, businesses, and individuals around the world buy these bonds and treasury notes, and the government uses all that money it gets back how it sees fit. However, when it's time for the government to pay its debt, all the money they made has already been spent. So they buy back all the treasuries and bonds, but only from the big financial institutions, and then pay them back with new money created out of thin air. Since March 2020, the Federal Reserve has bought back over $1 trillion in bonds, and is planning to continue to do so for the foreseeable future. With all the new money pumped into them by the government, banks can now give out more loans to people, earn more interest, and help grow the economy. But this increases the total amount of money in circulation, reducing the value of each dollar. With multi-trillion-dollar stimulus payments and infrastructure packages, it makes you wonder how long this stuff can go on for. New money steals value from old money. The amount in your bank account doesn't change, but because of the new money the government has just printed out of thin air, your money is no longer valuable as it once was. Basically, every second you store your wealth in any fiat currency, such as the US dollar, it is being devalued. You could stare at your bank balance, and day by day, you'll be able to buy less and less things with whatever you have left. The reality that money is nothing but an illusion is one that we must all embrace, because only then will the path to financial freedom become clearer. It's all a game that never truly ends. Understanding that money does not have any intrinsic value in itself, but instead only inherits the value we give to it, will prevent you from trying to store up your wealth in currency. Instead, using that money to acquire assets that will appreciate faster than inflation is the only way to win the game. And it's not really winning, it's avoiding total loss. As more and more money is printed each and every day, the value of each dollar in your pocket will continue to decrease. But the dollar value of the assets around the globe will continue to appreciate in value. But it's all a mirage, it's smoke and mirrors. A stock market that is literally in up-only mode may make it seem like it's all okay. But it isn't. It's all denominated in the same currency that is slowly dying each and every day. For example, if you were to denominate the Dow Jones, which is just a performance measurement of 30 large United States companies, in terms of gold instead of USD, you'll see that we're basically at the same place we were in 1997. Smoke and mirrors. But what's the end goal of all of this? With fiat and an unlimited supply of money, will the value of each currency just continue to decrease until the end of time? Will the gap between the rich and poor just continue to grow wider and wider? Or are we finally going to fix a problem as old as man itself, and stop placing our financial success in the hands of those who are destroying it day by day? Only time will tell. But just know, there is a way out. In May of 2023, Ivan Toney, an English soccer player who plays for Brentford Football Club in the English Premier League, was banned from soccer for 8 months and fined $62,500 after being found guilty of 232 breaches of the Football Association's betting rules. It's easy to write off his story as an individual failure on Ivan Toney's part, and while he is undoubtedly at fault and has been rightfully punished, the situation highlights a more significant problem with sports betting as a whole and how it's destroying young men. In 2012, American rapper 50 Cent bet $500,000 that the New York Giants would win the National Football Conference title. They did, and he won over $1 million. Not only did that bet elevate him in the eyes of the gambling elite, but it created a dream for young men everywhere. The dream of the winning bet. Today, that dream has been democratized through a seemingly endless stream of sports betting apps. The companies will sell you on the idea that, just like 50 Cent, you too can become a millionaire by placing the right bet on the game you love. Unfortunately, this easy access to gambling has opened the floodgates to a new public health and addiction crisis around the globe. And with major industries behind it, it's hard to imagine this epidemic ending anytime soon. One of these industries is the American National Football League, the NFL. In 2012, the same year that 50 Cent won his big bet, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell said that gambling was a threat to the league. And just over a decade since he made that statement, the 2023 Super Bowl was riddled with ads from major sportsbook companies like FanDuel and DraftKings. Did Goodell genuinely have a change of heart about betting, or were there just too many under-the-desk handshakes for him to keep his stance? We may never know for sure, but what's clear for all to see though, is that all the major sports leagues and the networks that license them now work together with casinos and gambling apps through multi-million-dollar partnerships. Announcers identify moments to place a bet as they're calling the game, and pre-game TV segments are devoted to analyzing betting odds. And it's not just in the US. The second tier of the English Football League pyramid is sponsored by a betting company. The competition is literally called the Sky Bet Championship. Look at this photograph of Ivan Toney, the footballer I mentioned earlier. See anything striking? Check out the logo on his jersey. It's for a sports betting company called Hollywood Bets. So the club he plays for is sponsored by a betting company. And that's just the biggest irony. And it's not just Brentford. Around 40% of shirt sponsors for clubs in the 2022 or 2023 Premier League were gambling companies. And as if sporting competitions and teams endorsing gambling aren't problematic enough, colleges filled with students who are too young to gamble are also jumping into bed with sportsbook apps. Representatives from these online gambling companies go to campuses to discuss their products and offer promotions, and it mimics the transition that happened years ago when universities in the US accepted beer and liquor partners at sporting events. These companies hide behind legality as a defense against criticism, and the argument is that legal sports betting apps are always safer than gambling on the black market with untrustworthy bookies. So if college kids are going to gamble anyway, Isn't it better they do so legally and safely? But the truth is only a tiny fraction of the students at these schools are even old enough to legally drink or gamble in the first place. While the argument makes some sense, the problem isn't really the legality of gambling, it's the aggressive marketing of the betting companies and their target audience. 1 in 5 American adults say they've bet money on sports in the last 12 months. In 2022, revenue from sports betting was around $75 billion, a 75% increase from 2021, and over 100 million legal Super Bowl 2023 transactions were recorded, a 25% increase from the previous year. The group most affected by this rapid rise in sports betting? Young men. It's a known scientific fact that young people are more predisposed to addiction. Telling avid young sports fans that they can make money through betting is extremely dangerous and unethical when you know that they have a higher chance of getting addicted than they do of winning anything. Gambling addicts have higher rates of depression and suicidal behavior than the rest of the population. As many as 19% of gambling addicts attempt suicide, the highest rate of any addiction. And another problem with sports gambling is that it's often an unseen addiction. When we think of gambling, we often picture rolling dice or shuffling cards, things that we perceive as having a random outcome, games of chance. But sports betting is different. Bettors are convinced that their choices are informed. After all, they've been following the sport since they were a kid, so they might consider themselves experts, giving themselves the illusion of control over the bets they place compared to traditional gambling. Some of these young men even turn to social media influencers for betting advice, not knowing that many of these self-proclaimed betting experts are scam artists looking to cash in on their followers. Sadly, the constant flow of sports betting information on platforms like Twitter and YouTube, together with the aggressive marketing of these betting companies, is driving people to bet higher and more frequently. People think they're making smart moves based on data when in reality they're still more likely to lose than they are to win. New Jersey was one of the first states in the US to legalize gambling. When they did, they increased funding for gathering data on every bet placed and for conducting regular studies on the industry as a whole. Records show that approximately 70% of all sports bets placed lose. That's an incredibly high number for an industry that promises data-driven odds. What makes sports betting addiction even more invisible is the fact that unlike alcohol or drugs, the warning signs might not be that obvious. The physical toll isn't as noticeable, and it's not until things get very, very bad that family and friends might start to piece together what's going on. It'll often start with joining a harmless fantasy sports league or placing a small bet on a single outcome, but once someone realizes they have access to unlimited betting in the palm of their hands, things can quickly get out of control. Because gamblers are able to gamble anywhere at any time through their smartphones, they could be sitting next to their spouse, roommate, or kids who have no idea that their loved one is gambling away all their life savings. Some of these new apps even connect directly to your bank account, making it easy to lose track of how much you're betting and losing. And since it's not a conventional addiction, few people seek help compared with other mental health disorders or physical addictions. When they do, there's also a high discontinuation of treatment. 39% of people who seek treatment will drop out before completing recovery, compared to a 20% dropout rate for other mental health issues. Like any addiction, there are treatment options, but recovering from a gambling addiction is particularly difficult because the drug of choice is with you at all times, on your phone. Therapists treating the addiction ask patients to stop using smartphones or even stop watching sports, and the sportsbook companies themselves don't make it easier for those addicted to quit. Cool-off functions on betting apps that block users from gambling for a few hours or days aren't easily accessible. Same with self-exclusion options that users can use to block themselves from the app for long periods of time. Unsurprisingly, the American Gaming Association, which lobbies to bolster and promote the gambling industry, insists that these self-imposed limits do exist, even though they're difficult to find. The association is also quick to note that it's the largest funder of recovery services as part of its commitment to promote responsible gambling. And it's not lying, but isn't that just taking 2 steps back and 1 step forward? That's still 1 step back. The focus in the US on gambling disorders has been minimal. Resources for addicts have been stretched thin during this current wave of betting. Calls to gambling hotlines in 2021 rose 43% over 2020, hotline texts increased 59%, and chats increased 84%. Yet at the same exact time, we're seeing a massive increase in advertising by online sportsbook companies. In 2022, in the United States alone, ad spending on sports betting was close to $1.8 billion. These ads promote misleading, risk-free bets and other perks that make an incredibly risky behavior seem not so risky. And it doesn't help that the ads are produced to glamorize gambling. They're wholesome and aspirational, showing people the lifestyle that they could have with all the money they'll win gambling, And they offer quick, confusing disclaimers that, like the side effects of a prescription drug, are difficult to see or hear. And of course these ads have led to record-breaking revenue for gambling companies. The terrifying part of this entire thing is that we're fully aware of the risks associated with sports betting. Just look at New Jersey, the first state to legalize gambling after a US Supreme Court ruling in 2018 left the decision of legalization to the states. Today, New Jersey has 3 times the national average of gambling addicts. Around 13% of the state's population suffers from a gambling problem. With this grim reality, why aren't we all clamoring for a ban or at least moderation of sports betting? To be fair, many of the remaining states where gambling is still illegal are in no rush to legalize it, and like with any trend, as the population adapts to the availability of legal sports gambling, its popularity may decrease. But we don't need to rely on potential outcomes to begin making a dent in solving the problem for the millions of Americans susceptible to gambling addiction. The app should set time and money limits, especially for their younger users. They should also fund public service announcements on television and social media about gambling addictions. In Australia, a country whose population has struggled with sports betting, live sports gambling isn't available online. Bets must be placed by phone or at a designated venue, which allows staff to intervene if they see the signs of addiction. In the UK, the government has banned all top athletes and celebrities from appearing in ads that endorse or promote gambling, and all 20 clubs in the English Premier League have agreed that they will no longer place gambling sponsorships on their matchday shirts starting at the beginning of the 2026-2027 season. The US needs to learn from and implement some of these measures because currently, federal oversight of legal online gambling is virtually non-existent. There's no federal funds designated for the treatment or research of gambling addiction, unlike tobacco, drugs, and alcohol, which all have federal support towards recovery efforts. And beyond the federal government, there's an unclear patchwork of state legislation and consumer protections. The American Gaming Association has created a responsible marketing code to set industry-wide advertising standards, but that's like asking cigarette companies in the 1950s to self-regulate the Marlboro Man. We need to see the same sanctions that were implemented on tobacco applied to the sports betting industry. One study showed that the tobacco industry wanted people hooked on a deadly product. The US Food and Drug Administration immediately limited advertising. To this day, it's impossible to buy cigarettes without being confronted with a dramatic label warning about their health implications. So why do we treat those who are susceptible to gambling addiction any differently? The science behind gambling addiction doesn't differ too much from being addicted to tobacco or even cocaine. Just as cigarettes can harm your physical health, sports betting has the potential to ruin families and lead to lifelong mental health struggles. As the government lags behind, gambling companies, sports leagues, and anyone else who can profit off of unwitting bettors rake in cash while our young men are being destroyed by the addiction. We're still in the early days of rampant sports betting, and it couldn't have come at a more dangerous time because of some of the people placing bets on sports aren't doing it for the love of the game, they're doing it for survival. With a depressed stock market, some people think sports betting is a better way to invest their money than buying stocks. Times are volatile, the financial markets are uncertain, and people are desperate. But the sad reality is that people who think they can find some sort of upside in sports betting will likely end up disappointed. Or worse. Are you depressed, in need of fulfillment? Do you feel like life is passing you by, like you're watching all your friends move forward, climbing the ladder of success, and accomplish the huge things that you wish you could? We've all felt like this at some point, and that feeling is that we can't get control of our lives. It's universal, but that doesn't make it any less painful. Then one day, you see a book. It boasts that the secrets to success, happiness, and personal growth are all inside. Do you buy it? Because I know I would, and I have, time and time again, flipping through those pages excitedly only to return to my unfulfilled state once no more pages are left. Millions of us are drawn to the world of self-help because we're looking for answers. But does this endless stream of advice, speeches, seminars, and products actually help us, or is self-help ruining our lives? In the 18th and 19th centuries, US and European entrepreneurs marketed and sold snake oil as a cure-all drug. In reality, though, all they were selling was mineral oil, sometimes mixed with household herbs and spices that contained no snake-derived ingredients whatsoever, and would in fact not cure any diseases. Today, a snake oil salesperson describes someone who advertises or sells any product that promises the world and fails to deliver. Sadly, that's the story of self-improvement, at least as it is today. Because while it might seem like a new trend, the idea of self-help dates back to early philosophers like Seneca and Socrates. In 5th century BC, Socrates spoke about the constant improvement of your soul.
He insisted that practices like meditation, fasting, prayer, and exercise could feed your soul and therefore improve your life. Plato, Epicurus, and Pythagoras followed in his footsteps, professing that working on yourself is a path to enlightenment. Hundreds of years later, in the 1970s, the New Age movement arose and preached a philosophy of personal transformation and healing. The movement revolved around accessing our spiritual energy through yoga, meditation, tarot card readings, and astrology. This idea that we could elevate ourselves and all of humanity has persisted, but like most things in the West, once people found out just how much money they could make, self-improvement shifted from being a guide for those who needed it the most to a product reserved for those who could afford it. Deepak Chopra, a prominent figure in the New Age movement, has emerged as one of the most critical self-help gurus in the world. His philosophy tells us that our mental health can determine our physical reality, that we can think ourselves into being healthier and happier. After his ideas were popularized by none other than Oprah Winfrey, Chopra became an international sensation. He used his platform to spread his message and sell his books. He's written 49 in total. He held seminars and became a spiritual advisor to celebrities like Michael Jackson. Needless to say, lost souls worldwide have made Chopra a very wealthy man. Tony Robbins, one of the most popular and controversial self-help figures, runs a multi-billion-dollar business. Exclusive membership to his program can cost as much as $85,000 a year. And although he's been wrapped up in accusations of harassment and hostility and is notorious for requiring his employees to sign NDAs, he still manages to sell out auditoriums for his speaking engagements. One of the biggest problems with self-help is that, just like snake oil salespersons, self-help experts claim to be able to heal the world with their speech. In reality, whether you're Chopra or Robbins, or one of the hundreds of other experts, you can never be a therapist for everyone. Personal mental health professionals like licensed therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists listen to individuals and understand their needs and offer unique solutions, whereas self-help gurus use their personal stories to convince followers that they have all the answers without recognizing the nuance of each individual's situation. Not only are these gurus convincing us that their solutions are a one-size-fits-all, but a vast majority of them don't even have the qualifications to be discussing mental health in the first place. We can all agree that what causes us stress, pain, or depression isn't the same for everyone, and the way stress shows itself is different too. Some of us might spend days on the sofa watching reruns of Friends, while others might go out partying every night. We can't judge or offer solutions without engaging with each person individually and trying to understand their motives. Self-help gurus peddle magic solutions to make you, their audience, believe they have some elusive secret that you won't find without them. This is how they turned it into a $13 billion industry littered with books, speaking events, and mentorship programs. But these books and events rarely address the actual issues in your life. They promise easy fixes that are nice to hear, but often fall short of helping you develop actionable ways to help yourself. One study, which reviewed over 100 cases, found that self-help treatment plans are hard to follow and easy to misinterpret. And frankly, this is what the industry wants, because if you could actually help yourself, who would buy their books or attend their coaching sessions? The goal of this endless stream of books and speeches isn't healing, it's to make you feel good for a moment, but eventually to feel miserable again, so you can pick up the next book. If this isn't the case, explain why you need 49 books written by the same person to teach you how to help yourself. Many self-help gurus do more than just write books. They have speaking engagements, YouTube channels, paid newsletters, and personal coaching sessions. The harsh reality is that you're ultimately more valuable to them when you're unhappy and discontent. So why would they teach you how to help yourself? The endless cycle of self-help content triggers the dopamine system in our brain, which is the same system that regulates or succumbs to addiction. When we read a chapter of a self-help book, we get a flood of dopamine and feel motivated to take on life's challenges, but when that dopamine wears off, we're left craving more. And we turn back to where we got it from, the self-help content. That's why we feel a strange combination of excitement and inadequacy after watching a TED Talk about living a more fulfilling life. In reality, people who consume self-help books have higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol and are more likely to have symptoms of depression. When we're in the moment, our brain tricks us into thinking we've accomplished something when in reality we've done nothing to move ourselves forward. The world of self-help comes in all shapes and sizes. Some gurus focus on helping your career, others on your spiritual enlightenment. But they all have one thing in common: they all claim to have the secret to turning you into your best self. Recently, one of the running themes has been hustle culture, and it's the idea that if you work like hell, put in an 80-hour work week, and are productive every second of every day, you'll achieve career success. But anyone who's actually attempted an 80-hour work week or try to survive on 4 hours of sleep a night in the name of productivity can tell you that the hustle is opposite of glamorous. Yeah, you might make some money, but you've worked so hard that you have no time to enjoy it with family and friends. You work so hard and push yourself so far that you burn out, soon negativity sits in, and now you feel worse than before. What do you do? Do you listen to your body and rest, or do you pick up a book and hit play on a podcast about happiness, fulfillment, and positivity? They tell you that your negative emotions aren't real, and that if you just focus on the good things in life, you'll get through it. This is toxic positivity, an attempt to dismiss negative emotions and respond to distressing situations with false reassurance.
There's no war in Ba Sing Se.
You may have heard the catchy phrases like "no bad days" or "everything happens for a reason," which are meant to make us dismiss any notion that our lives aren't amazing. Toxic positivity can ultimately come across as if we lack empathy towards ourselves and others, and that we ignore important decisions and emotions instead of accepting them. Because the truth is, avoiding our negative emotions only makes us feel worse later. If maximizing productivity and positivity isn't the brand of self-empowerment you're seeking, you might turn to guidance on self-care. The idea of self-care started in the 1980s when the black feminist writer and activist Audre Lorde proclaimed it as a political act. Sadly, it has since been co-opted and thoroughly misused by the internet. Over the past 5 years, searches for self-care have nearly tripled. Almost 70 billion Instagram posts include self-care, and on TikTok, hashtag self-care has racked up over 30 billion views. Whether the advice comes from a wellness guru like Gwyneth Paltrow or from a 22-year-old influencer, self-care can go too far. This self-help practice, like toxic positivity, can pull us away from the reality of our lives, and often it's a reality that we need to deal with. Self-care and hustle culture are on a collision course in one specific area of the self-help world: multi-level marketing companies. MLMs are popular and controversial businesses that sell products through a network of non-salaried salespeople who get commissions from the many other people they recruit to the job. MLMs claim to empower their workforce and help them find meaning in their lives. If you work for an MLM, you're not just selling their product, but the lifestyle that's tied to it. The head of the company becomes a guru, a motivational speaker with an inspirational backstory that you can connect to. And like most other self-help companies, MLMs have conventions, seminars, robust Facebook groups, and even books written by their founders, all meant to convince you that you'll be happy and healthy with their magical product. And if you bring 3 people who bring 3 people, you will be wealthy. MLMs have proven even more insidious than the typical self-help companies because they convince their distributors that their fortunes are just around the corner. The unsuspecting victims then invest so much of their money into these snake oil products only to end up with an overflow of items they can't sell, financial debt, or even worse, anxiety and depression. And the problem is more widespread than you think. 1 in 4 Americans report that their social media feeds have been hijacked by MLMs. This proliferation of social media has taken the warning signs of self-help into a new territory. The gurus are no longer household names like Chopper and Robbins. Now, thousands of influencers are self-proclaimed gurus offering mental and physical health advice through short captions and images that are never enough to unpack deep psychological understanding. And since many of us spend too much time scrolling on our phones, we're so busy consuming content about self-help that we don't actually do anything with the information. Instead, we overanalyze ourselves and end up convinced that there's something deeply wrong with us that we'll never be able to dig ourselves out of. The enlightened, happy person we always hope to be might be unreachable. The truth is, not all self-help is bad, and the key to it, like anything in life, is balance. Sometimes watching a motivational video or reading a chapter of a self-help book can give us the boost we need to perform that real-life action. The key is knowing how to sort out the helpful content from the cheap money-making schemes. Look for content that doesn't oversell a mission statement and applies a clear, practical approach to self-help. An example is the very popular book Atomic Habits by James Clear, which offers specific adjustments that we can all make to form better habits. Of course, the trick here is that once you read it, you need to make those adjustments in your daily life. Because self-help is never about the words you hear someone else say, but about the actions you can convince yourself to take. The key to a good life isn't hidden in some book or a $3,000 seminar. In fact, everything you need to know about living a good life can be written on a post-it note. Work hard, eat healthy, exercise, and focus on building healthy relationships. Sadly, post-it notes don't turn into multi-million-dollar book deals.
A couple of weeks ago, I was having dinner with a friend and overheard what had to be a first date at the table right next to us. The conversation was awkward at first as they both seemed to struggle to get a good flow going. I looked over a bit later to see that they were now much more engaged in discussion. They shared their interests and had started looking each other in the eye more often. They even touched hands. Slowly, the pair of them seemed to grow affectionate towards each other. I went to the bathroom and the guy on the date walked in and used the urinal next to me. And to my greatest shock, right there on his phone was an open dating app. With his less busy hand, he was swiping left and right. Back at the table, he ended the date abruptly and called it a night. Just like that, he was moving on to the next option available to him at just the click of a button. Maybe I'm a bit out of touch, but what I witnessed seems so cruel and callous that I asked myself, is that what dating is like now? Where we just swipe human beings left or right, discarding and approving potential mates on our quest to lasting romance, a one-night stand, or something in between. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Dating sucks and has always sucked. Every date you go on, whether from an app or a more natural arrangement, you set yourself up for the strong likelihood of being disappointed or disappointing someone else. You might get your heart broken when your love is unrequited, or have to tear someone's heart out when you're just not feeling it. You might say the wrong thing, or your date might not even show up. These worries are the same now as they have been since romantic love became a thing in the 19th century. There's less emphasis on men needing to pick up their date in a hot rod and buy them dinner and drinks. And of course, gay and lesbian dates are more common, but otherwise, many of the worries are the same. Sadly, though, there is something distinctly different and more sinister about the world of online dating. You may need to be older to remember, but online dating first became a thing in the mid-90s and was heavily stigmatized at the time. Using Match.com or Kiss.com was for people who couldn't handle the real world of dating. Culturally, it was seen as a sign of weakness. Just like everything else that came with the internet, online dating grew and the potential dangers grew with it. Meeting a stranger, especially alone, poses a risk. Dating apps pose a slightly aggravated risk because they tend to attract an outsized portion of psychopaths and love addicts, with one seeing you as a victim and the other as their savior. That's not to suggest that you'll end up at the bottom of a river if you go on a few online dates, but that, at the very least, you might have had a really bad experience or two. When services like eHarmony arrived, they made a stronger case for computer-based matching using more detailed information. The services required you to take a quiz and would then try to pair people up based on their compatibility. Then in 2012, everything changed when Tinder arrived on the scene. The premise was simple. Once you opened the app, you were greeted with a multitude of options for a potential mate. A huge picture and a tiny description about them stared you right in the face. All you had to do was swipe right if you were interested and left if you weren't. If two people swiped right on each other, bingo, they matched and they could start a conversation. Even with just this basic understanding of how dating apps work, it shows how much we've managed to turn people into a commodity. This swiping feature isn't much different than flipping through products on a carousel ad you might see on Facebook or Instagram, or sifting through the different brand names in the grocery store. Right, left, is this really how we want to be viewed by others? Think about it, you're looking for someone to be intimate and vulnerable with, and we're presenting ourselves like a flavor of chips on a shelf. Realistically, how much can you expect from a relationship that starts out almost transactionally? The state of modern dating is the consequence of the system that we've created. Dating on these apps is now ruthless, with ghosting, no-shows, and hostile and inappropriate messaging being much more common. Meeting up with someone on a dating app is no different than trying to buy or sell something on Kijiji. If one of the parties loses interest, they typically just don't show up. No message, no courtesy call, they just move on. This is bad enough when you're trying to just buy a product, but much worse when the product is your time, attention, and emotions. When an app treats people like products on a shelf, this attitude rubs off on its users. You're not swiping right on a human being, you're swiping on a product, and if that product doesn't seem desirable anymore, you discard it. And these are the factors of dating apps before we've even considered how their algorithms factor in. Although Tinder insists it doesn't use this system anymore, many of the card-based dating apps use a desirability score, or ELO. The more you match with people you swipe right on, the more desirable you're considered. The app then pushes your profile to more people. This process has little to do with making a match. The goal is to keep people on the platform by dangling desirable individuals in front of them. The more attractive people you see, the more likely you are to feel hope that the one is out there and you won't delete the app. It's similar to how lotteries lure you in with bigger jackpots. Even though the odds are still next to impossible, the increasing pile of money keeps you hopeful when despair is the more appropriate response. When someone ranks higher, it doesn't make them more likely to be good in a relationship, it just means that people found them attractive based on the superficial criteria. Putting more of these people in your set of cards does nothing to increase your odds of finding love, it just increases the odds of you staying on the platform. Those with lower scores are shown less often, which gives them two options: give up, or pay to have their profile boosted. This common feature among the apps exploits people who don't present well for profit. Being able to boost your profile just gets you back to a more level playing field that you shouldn't have been denied in the first place. Remember that these platforms are, above all else, money-making systems. As we discussed in our recent video on algorithms, the bias towards profit has consequences, and in the case of dating apps, those consequences may be the dire state of the dating landscape or your chances for lasting love. Maybe the most disastrous thing about dating apps is that we're ultimately commodifying love, and that can change the way we view and experience it. When we're attracted to someone, our brain releases the chemical dopamine as a reward response. Online dating apps train us to constantly seek this dopamine hit from attraction or lust. Then when we're with someone, we're no longer getting that high of attraction. We know it can easily be found on an app in our pocket. All we have to do is ghost, deceive, or abruptly break up with someone in order to get it again. Even just looking at an attractive person on your app will give you a hit of dopamine, making loyalty to a lover much less appealing. You get hooked into a reward cycle, it becomes addictive. Just as you get a blip of joy from a like on social media, you get a hit of dopamine from a match on Tinder. It keeps you coming back even if you've found someone worth keeping. Most of us have been with someone we loved and still question whether there was someone better out there. Apps like Tinder exploit this feeling. They overwhelm you with choice, making you feel like you're never making the right one. And so you move on, back to the phone, back to the dopamine hits so readily available. As you go on dates and start relationships, the app is always dangling that shinier object or human being right in front of you. Because it's so fast and easy to get a new shot of dopamine by simply opening the app on our phones, we don't give ourselves enough time to get to know a person. Once a date gets even slightly boring, we're off to the bathroom to find the next dopamine hit. The problem with this is that although we're spiking our brains full of dopamine, we aren't spending enough time in relationships for our brains to produce oxytocin, or those warm, cuddly feelings which are more common in long-term relationships or with close friends and family. Oxytocin helps reduce our blood pressure and cortisol levels, which help reduce stress. It also promotes growth and healing. If you've ever been in a long-term loving relationship, you know just how at peace you feel. How when you're with this person, everything feels alright with the world. Dating apps are weaning us off of this feeling. Now, if those were the only problems with dating apps, then maybe the situation wouldn't be so dire, but sadly, there's more. Like most online interactions, dating apps are often devoid of the empathy and consideration you typically get in real-world interactions. Sure, there are bad experiences to be had at your workplace or school, and occasionally, someone will behave callously towards you in person, but these bad experiences are far more prevalent online, where people can hide behind their computer screens. The odd thing about this, though, is that even with all of their issues, dating apps seem to work. People do find long-lasting relationships on these platforms, and of course people looking for hookups find that too. Meeting people in real life is hard, maybe harder these days than ever before. When you meet someone in real life and want to ask them on a date, you're taking a big risk, and we're all hyper aware of that risk. Well, most of us. If you ask a colleague or a peer on a date, for example, you're more likely to face some level of scrutiny now, even if it's small. And if you ask for someone's number in a grocery store, well, maybe you become the weirdo people complain about on Twitter. Considering this, it's not hard to see why people want anonymity in their dating life. Still, these dating apps don't need to be set up algorithmically to encourage cruelty or gouge less desirable people for money. Instead, we should empathize getting to know someone before a date and caring about them as human beings first, not just another item for sale at the nearby big box store. To do that, though, we need to crack open the black box and fundamentally change how the algorithms that power these dating apps work. Click the video on your screen right now to find out more. In 2013, Eric Loomis was pulled over by the police for driving a car that had been used in a shooting. A shooting, mind you, that he wasn't involved in at all. After getting arrested and taken to